So, hello to everyone. Hopefully, soon to join the Thursday evening David 67 Celtic live stream. Obviously, very disappointing game and disappointing result in the end, with Celtic losing to FC Midtjylland over in Denmark. A game, I think, which before we went into the game, I was hopeful Celtic were going to maybe get a point out of. I think possibly quite a lot of us underestimated just how good Midtjylland were. And maybe overestimated how well Celtic had been doing in the last couple of games. All in all a rather disappointing evening in the end. And once we get a few more people joining in the live stream, we'll maybe start having a bit more of a chat in depth about the game, where it went wrong, did anything go okay? Also, yep, Paul Maguire, I think you've pretty much summed things up pretty perfectly there. Poor performance all round tonight. I think there were one or two players who maybe did come off with a wee bit of credit, but overall, disappointing, poor performance. For me, a bit of a frustrating performance. In that, I think actually Celtic, for the first half hour or so, defended pretty well. We seemed to really struggle to get the ball going in midfield. We really struggled to get the ball up to Johnny Kenny, as it is so often in recent times. Celtic's best way of getting the ball forward and getting the ball into the danger zone is out to Togetherness, who then can do a bit of magic up and down the wing, cut inside, cross into the box. And indeed, actually, Celtic in the first minute, nice move down the left-hand side. Togetherness got the ball into the box, and Engels, I think it was, from the edge of the box, had a shot on goal, which the goalie saved. We then did have another chance with Nygren around about 15 minutes or so, but Nygren unfortunately hit it over the bar. And I think for the first half hour or so, although Midtjylland had tons and tons of the ball, they had a few shots. Kasper Schmeichel made a few pretty easy saves, made a really good save around about the 30th minute. And then I think for the most part, for the first half hour or so, Austin Trusty especially defended very, very well. And then a bit of a sucker punch with 3 goals in 8 minutes, from the 33rd minute, the 35th minute, and then the 41st minute. And Celtic, in the end, went into half-time, made a couple of changes. Second half, I think it was pretty much 50-50. Celtic had 3 shots on goal. Midtjylland had about 3 shots on goal. We scored 1 goal in the second half. They never really looked like they were going to score in the second half. Celtic had a shot from Ralston, a shot from Osmond, and then the Rio Hatate penalty kick. Good evening to you as well, Clashman Numpty. Just see what we're saying here. I would agree partly with what you're saying there. I think the plan with Martin O'Neill always was, from what he's been saying, probably for him to take the team through to the international window, which is after the game against Kilmarnock on Sunday. That then gives a 13-day gap between the Kilmarnock game next on Sunday in 3-4 days' time, and then the next game after that is against St Mirren, which will be 13 days later. And so it does give Celtic, if they want to, a good chance to bring in a new manager, maybe get him in the end of the first week, give him a whole week with the remaining squad, give him half a week with the players coming back off international window. I personally don't think that Celtic need a massive clear out of players. I think what they do need is players to come together as a team. I think the game against Falkirk, the game against Rangers showed that Celtic do actually have good players, get them confident, get them playing together. I think tonight was a poor performance and a particularly poor defensive performance for about 10 minutes or so. And the other thing is, for one reason or another, we never ever got any control of midfield. Nygren, Engels, Hattati, McGregor, Paolo Bernardo, all five of them had a go at getting a bit of control and passing going in the midfield. And Celtic just couldn't get any passing going in the midfield. I will be doing a full post-match review video tomorrow, but quite a number of the stats in terms of possession, shots on goal, passes, etc., were all rather disappointing. So, fully agree, Clashman Nupty. I think we do need to add a few players in the we do need to add a few players in the transfer window. I think we also need to develop a bit of teamwork and cohesion. What struck me between Midtjylland tonight and Celtic tonight is how well they played as a team, how well they knew what each other was going to do. It still feels as if Celtic are kind of feeling their way and learning how each other plays. Obviously, quite a lot of newcomers coming into the side. No one really under Brendan Rodgers fully established themselves in the side. There was a bit of chopping and changing with players coming and going, a bit of adding of players with injuries, and then obviously Martin Neal's come in, made one or two wee changes. If we're being, I think, fair and honest, Callum Osman's been a very good player for Celtic. Unfortunately, it looks like he's going to be out for 2 or 3 months with a hamstring injury. Austin Trusty's come in. He had a good performance against Falkirk, really good performance against Rangers. I think he was one of Celtic's 2 players tonight who had a decent game. Johnny Kenny's been given more responsibility since O'Neill came in. I think that's worked in the first couple of games. It didn't really seem to get into today's game for one reason or another. So Celtic do need to add some players in the transfer window. I think they also need to get their current players all blended together as a team. And just coming back to that one last other thought, I do think Clashman Numpty, Celtic getting a new manager with new ideas, new formations, etc., is a good idea. A lot of rumours suggesting that Kjetil Knutsen is a potential target. Some other people suggesting Nicky Hayen of Bruges apparently is also high up on the rankings as well. So we'll see over the next couple of weeks or so whether Celtic actually finalise who they're going for, who they're going to try and bring in, and then take it from there. Clashman Umpty, I respectfully disagree. I think we're both partly right. I think the Rangers' performance was good. I think Celtic played well as a team against Rangers. They showed a lot of good attacking intent. They put away some of their chances. They did a good job on against Falkirk. They did a good job against Rangers. They had a poor performance tonight, particularly that 10-minute spell. Although for the great part of the game, they lacked the ball, they lacked possession. And as I said, I think they particularly lost the ability to win the ball in midfield. I think that's Marty Boyd. I think it's a brilliant point. I think there is a definite problem with recruitment. Argument to say that Paul Tidsdale's been a large part of the recruitment team. One or two other people were brought in to change the scouting and recruitment team. There does seem a disconnect, and certainly reading between the lines regarding Midtjylland, they have been especially good at player recruitment, player identification. They've had a good set of transfer windows. They have spread their transfer net, recruitment net, scouting net far and wide, brought in players from all around the world. That was also quite interesting when they were bringing on subs. They were bringing on subs who are international football players, but from all over the world. They've got players from Africa, players from Eastern Europe. They got some native Danish players. They got players who've come in from Central America, and they certainly spread their net far and wide. All I would say, please, if we are going to make comments in the comment section, no insults, no name calling, no bad spirit. All for all debate, all for people sharing their opinions, but please do stop name calling, nastiness. This is supposed to be a friendly, respectful Celtic site, okay? And I do want to reiterate that, and we want to have a good spirit, good discussion, friendly discussion. We don't want name calling, and we don't want nastiness, and we don't want rudeness. We're all grown-ups, we're all adults, and we can all behave ourselves. Okay, David Connor, what we're saying here. Yes. So that's an interesting point. I would say with the nature of, I think, with my personal opinion, with the nature of the Europa League is that lots of teams within the Europa League are going to be able to beat lots of other teams in the Europa League. Last season, it only took 10 points to get into the knockout phase. It only took 14 points to get into the top 8. Now, Celtic have got 4 games left. Away at Feyenoord, home against Roma, home against Utrecht, and away against Bologna. I think Celtic can get wins and points out of all those games. Up until today's game, both Feyenoord, Utrecht and Roma were all beneath us in the league. Bologna were a few points ahead of us in the league. So I think what we're going to see probably in the Europa League is a couple of teams, 2 or 3 teams being ahead of everybody. Strange thing is that Braga and Midtjylland are the 2 teams who are the pace setters so far in this Europa League. A lot of other teams, as I say, Bologna, Roma, Stuttgart, quite a lot of what would be favourites have actually are further down the league. I personally think that Celtic should go into every game intending to win and draw, be it in Scottish football, be it in European football. I think if Celtic play to their form, play to their best, they can get points off Roma, Feyenoord, Utrecht and Bologna. If they have a poor performance like we did tonight, we're going to struggle to beat anybody. I thought our performance against Sturm Graz in the previous game was overall a good game. We created lots of chances, but didn't put them away. I think in the games against Falkirk and Rangers, with a change of management, we're a bit more clinical. We were a bit more creating good quality chances. Tonight, we didn't get any control of midfield. As I say, the 5 midfielders we played didn't really get a goal. Forrest and Maeda were pretty poor down the right-hand side. Chuniecki in the first half showed lots of flashes. I thought Osman showed a lot of energy when he came on. Unfortunately, he's out injured. Kenny was disappointing in the first half, but if you don't get a player the ball, he's going to struggle to do much with it. So I think Celtic probably should concentrate more on Scottish football, but give the Europa League all their effort as well when they do play those games, but particularly concentrate on the Scottish games. And I think personally, Celtic can bounce back on Sunday quite happily. Marty Boy. For me, our most disappointing player on the night was Anthony Ralston. He had all the 3 goals that Midtjylland scored all came down the right-hand side. He and Forrest should never have let their wide player, get the ball into the box for the header at the back post. Then Ralston and Engels just kind of let that player run through the middle of them, curling shot into the far corner, and then some poor defending at the front post, ball to the back post. Tierney and Chinecki didn't close down the Francolino, who then hit a nice curling shot past Schmeichel. Ralston certainly seemed to really struggle for most of the game, particularly in the first half. Second half, I think actually Midtjylland, after about 60 minutes, took off 2 of their players who played particularly well in the first half. Sligo Boy, of course you can comment. I don't know. I presume the Midtjylland manager probably thought after 60 minutes that he wanted to take off a couple of these players who'd been playing particularly well, save them for the next league match. But having said that, the players that Midtjylland brought on were international players. They brought on an African international. I can't remember, there was a Brazilian player and then was another player, but 2 of the 3 of them were full internationals. So it does actually show that Midtjylland have been very good at recruiting their players, very good at finding players from different markets. And I can't remember whose point it was earlier on, but I think Celtic's recruitment team, Celtic's scouting team needs to get back to some of the ways that they did when Ange Postecoglou first came in. When he first came in, we got players from less usual markets. We got those players obviously in from Japan. We got Enalsa Johnson from Canada, from the American League. And I think Celtic certainly need to start spreading their net wider and wider and finding good quality players from all around the world. Well, Marty Boy, I think Celtic playing, if Celtic played the way they did against Falkirk, the way they did against Rangers, the way they did against Sturm Graz, I think Celtic can compete in this Europa League. Today we didn't play well, particularly for, as I say, that 10 minutes of defensive period where Ralston made a number of mistakes. Other players didn't come back and cover. And I think part of that is just new players coming together, forming a team. Quite a number of players have been in and out the side with injuries. New players coming in late in the transfer window. Martin Neal comes in, slightly changes the system, so the players have got to learn new defensive systems, new midfield systems. So I think there's quite a number of different factors. So Marty Boy, I accept them 100%. Your viewpoint is equally valid. I think Celtic do have the quality to compete in the Europa League if they play at their B plus A level form, which they have done off and on. Particularly for me, the Rangers match, particularly for me, the Falkirk match, particularly for me, the Sturm Graz match. We've had some very disappointing performances. The Dundee game, the Hearts game, the 2K at Almaty games, the awful Rangers draw early in the season. Braga, I think there were some good points in the Braga match, some poor points in the Braga match. And I think the Braga match largely revolved around the disallowed Kelechi Iheanacho goal. I think had Celtic got that goal, it could have been a very different match. However, Celtic didn't get that goal, and it wasn't a different match. Same as tonight. Maybe if Engels had hit that first minute shot better, maybe the whole game's different. Maybe if Nygren, when the score's still 0-0, gets the shot on goal rather than blasting it over the bar, maybe it's a different game. Celtic didn't take their chances to get on top in the game. Midtjylland took their chances. They were very clinical. They were very efficient. They played really well as a team. We have to remember, going into this game, Midtjylland had 3 wins out of 3, including beating Nottingham Forest away from home. Beating any English Premier League side away from home is a good result. And I think Midtjylland are a very well-organised team. They've got a very good team ethic. They've got lots of players that come in and play for them. And I think they are an example of a very well-run club. Thank you, Pope Leo the 14th. Thank you for the blessings, and I think my personal feeling is that Celtic will bounce back on Sunday. Nice confidence-building game against Kilmarnock, and start again. I thought Liam Scales made a few mistakes tonight. Kieran Tierney made a few mistakes. Anthony Ralston made a lot of mistakes. I think part of the problem Celtic also had personally was that the midfielders, McGregor, Engels, Nygren, none of them really got back terribly well to defend. Forrest did try to get back to defend, but didn't defend terribly well at all. I was personally a bit surprised that Maeda was on the bench and Forrest started, but the commentator was suggesting that Maeda was having a bit of problems with fitness. Yes, completely agree. I think you've summed that really well. I think we were poor tonight, particularly that 15 minutes or so, from 30 minutes to 45 minutes. Midtjylland very much got in control, and when they got on control, they scored goals. The spells where we did have a bit of control, a bit of attacking, we really only got that one goal with the penalty kick from Hatate after Osman was pulled down in the box. And for the great majority of the game, we just didn't get any control in midfield, and the midfielders didn't come back to defend very well. But I do agree also, I think Midtjylland are, as I said earlier, I think they're a very well-organised team. They've won 3 games out of 3, including the Nottingham Forest game. So I think they're a good team. They've added good players during their transfer window. They've done successively well and I think also the level of competition that Midtjylland have every season in the Danish league is stronger than Celtic have in the Scottish League, and I think that is another factor why some leagues which used to be on a par with us, like Belgium, like Norway, like Denmark, like Sweden maybe, they're all starting to get further and further away from us because they've got good quality and depth amongst their teams. Midtjylland had to go through several rounds of qualifying to get to this stage. If you think also that they've got Brøndby and they've got Copenhagen every season to beat, they've actually got some good, strong Danish teams in their league that they have to beat every season. In Belgium, obviously, there are 3 or 4 teams every season who are challenging for the title. And I think that's part of why, if we think about the last 15 years, Celtic's won the title every year apart from one. And in most of those seasons, Celtics won the title without there being too much competition over the season, in general terms. I think I would tend to agree. Tend to agree that our recruitment in the last 2-3 years has been rather disappointing. We seem to have gone away from some of the things that seem to be working well. We've changed things round. We've brought in Paul Tidsdale. No one was terribly sure when he came in quite what his role would be. It does seem to be the head of player recruitment, head of player scouting. He also seems to have some kind of analyst role within the club to try and maximise player potential and player development and stuff. It doesn't really sound like he's doing what he's supposed to be doing, in that we don't seem to be recruiting very well. We don't seem to be scouting very well. We did make 2 or 3 changes to our scouting and recruiting team after Ange Postecoglou left and Brendan Rodgers came in. We did seem to make changes to the team. Peter Lawwell's son left, and the guy, was it Dudgeon left? He was the previous chief scout. They both seemed to leave, and I don't think we've replaced them terribly well. Whether it was right or wrong to sack those 2 people, I don't know. Again, we didn't have the best of transfer windows in 23-24 when they were still in charge of those facets. I think Kieran Tierney has been. He's not the Kieran Tierney that we had before he got transferred off to Arsenal. I think he's been pretty decent. He's struggled obviously for a bit of form, a bit of injury, a bit of energy. I don't think he was partly to blame, along with Chinecki, for the 3rd goal, not marking their striker who got that left foot shot off. I thought he defended otherwise fine. This game, he just did not seem to get forward at all. Not many of Celtic's players actually got forward to really do any damage in the final third, really, until Callum Osmond came on, and then we did start to get the ball forward a bit better. I think personally, once Tierney gets fully settled down, fully fit, I think once he also gets an established partnership in front of him in left midfield and left side of the front 3, or however O'Neill or the new manager plays things, I think Tierney will start to settle down better. I think there has been times where Tierney's been a good player. I think there's an argument for the next wee while maybe to start Sirachi and have Tierney coming off the bench. That worked particularly well against Rangers on Sunday. I thought Tierney actually contributed really well when he came on around about the 75th, 80th minute. I can't remember, Finbar. I can't remember I can't remember what particular film that one comes from, but certainly I think the theme is that Kaiser Soze was this mystery man that nobody saw and stuff. I think he was the ultimate. He was the ultimate baddie, the person that did the murders or whatever in the picture in the film. And I think that also I think could well be a very good point you're making there as well, in that it's not terribly sure who actually is our recruitment manager, who actually is the scouting manager, and it's like many things. What I would really like is for Celtic and actually most football clubs to be much more open and player and people like the recruitment manager, the scouting manager, being made available for press conferences and media interviews and stuff. But instead, there just seem to be people in the background. Same way, I think people like Michael Nicholson, Mackay, the chief financial officer, I think they should be made available every couple of months or so for press conferences, for media interviews, to tell the fans, to tell the public, to tell the footballing public quite what's going on behind the scenes. Quite a lot of other major sporting organizations, particularly the ones in America, the backroom people like general manager, scouting, recruiting, physios, etc., are a lot more visible and a lot more media presence. And I personally think that Celtic should maybe start a new trend in Scottish football and putting recruitment people, scouting people, physios, doctors up to maybe explain when Jota's coming back, when Johnson's coming back, when's Iheanacho, Callum Osmond, Carter Vickers, etc., etc. I think it'd be really quite useful for, as well as having Martin O'Neill or Callum McGregor or whomever doing a press conference on a Friday or a whatever day of the week, you maybe had a press conference or an interview every now and again with some of the backroom people to explain what their role is, maybe explain what targets they've been going for in the transfer window, where they're concentrating their searches on. I think all these things would be really good ideas personally, and I would actually really like to see one of the physios or the doctors from the backroom team explaining the injuries and explaining the recovery for the players, because Jota seems to be coming back in the new year, but it'd be really great to have a more fixed date for that. Similarly, when's Johnson coming back? When's Iheanacho's coming back? Is Carter Vickers out for the season? Definitely. Is there some leeway with that? How long's Osmond going to be out for? I think that would really, really help for transparency and keep everybody properly informed. All I would say, Marty Boy, without being accused of being a board apologist, etc., I think Celtic, for one reason or another, or probably half a dozen reasons, this season have got rather stale, rather slow, rather sluggish. Now, the two games previously under Martin O'Neill, a lot of more passion and teamwork and attack and creativity came back into the side. Tonight, we didn't have that. Is that because Midtjylland were so well organised? They know their tactics. They know the way they're going to play. They have an interesting style of football. They've got some really talented players, particularly their wide players, good strong defenders. They had some good bite in midfield. And I think a point Clashman Numpty made a wee bit earlier in the piece. What I really think Celtic required tonight and really require going forward, and I think it's a point that lots and lots of us have made, is I think Celtic really needs some kind of midfield enforcer, somebody who's got real bite and aggression and an ability to take a game by the scruff of the neck and control things, like Paul Lambert used to be able to do, Neil Lennon used to be able to do, Scott Brown used to be able to do, Victor Wanyama did when he was with us. To a lesser extent, players like Nir Beaton also could often take control of midfield. But in this current team, we don't really have anybody who is a midfield enforcer, somebody who takes the scruff of the neck. Now, theoretically, that should be Callum McGregor's role. I don't think he's really that sort of player. And there were several points in tonight's match I really wish that McGregor, Engels, Nygren, or somebody just maybe got involved in midfield, a bit of needle. Now, to be fair, again against Rangers, Celtic were much more combative, much more needle, much more aggression in midfield, and they took control of midfield. Tonight, we just lost all control of midfield. Let's see, Sligo Boy, that's a really interesting point. We do seem this season to be particularly prone to hamstring problems. Obviously, Johnson's been out twice with a hamstring problem. Iheanacho's out with a hamstring problem. Osmond's out with a hamstring problem. Dyson Maida had some hamstring problems, not to the level of those other players. We have had, over the last couple of seasons, quite a lot of problems with hamstring problems and calf problems, which is the same sort of type of injury. So it really would be quite interesting if whoever Celtic's head of physios and head of doctors is, I think it's Simon Williamson, if he was put up for a press conference, he could maybe explain why our players are getting these injuries more than one would expect, or is this the same frequency that every other football club has, and what Celtic are doing to try and stop these injuries happening. So I think you make a really good point. We did seem to have quite a number of those sorts of injuries under Ange Postecoglou. That's continued under Brendan Rodgers, and we seem to have picked up another one. According to Martin O'Neill in his interview, Callum Osman's never had a hamstring problem before, but he certainly seemed to have a pretty major hamstring problem today, and looks like he's out for a couple of months or so. I think Clashman Numpty in the winter transfer window, whoever comes in will get a good transfer chest to bring players in. I think also Celtic are probably likely to move 2 or 3 players on. Depends a wee bit on what Dyson Maida wants to do as a career. Depends a wee bit on what Rio Hatate wants to do for his career. I think probably a player like Yang is probably going to move on, given the fact we do have several other people to play the wide role, who for me should be ahead of him in the pecking order. We should have Jota back in the new year. So I think moving Yang on in the new year would be a very good idea. So I think there will be natural turnover in the squad, 2 or 3 players going out, 4 or 5 players coming in, that kind of idea. And I think more importantly, in the summer transfer window, we release quite a lot more funds to, again, probably some natural turnover of the squad, but particularly bringing in some upgrades and some new players to fit whoever the new manager's system is. I think probably, given the fact that our new manager is probably going to be coming in December at the earliest, probably he's going to have to work 90% with the squad that he's got, add 10, 15% in the new window, a bit of turnover of players, but I think he's got to merge some new players into the existing squad and getting the existing squad playing as well as it can. There is some argument for keeping Martin O'Neill through to the end of the season for continuity, although personally, I think it's probably what most people feel. We probably should get someone in the next 2 or 3 weeks, get them in for the start of December. That gives them a bit of time to prepare for the St Mirren Cup final, the Hearts game on the 7th of December. Yes, Breezy Ice, thanks for joining us. I think the 13-day gap between the Kilmarnock game on Sunday and the St Mirren game 2 weeks later is a really good chance to get whoever it is to come in. The interesting thing would be whoever that's going to be. Managers like Wilfred Nancy, who's managing in America with Columbus Crew, he's been put forward. Kjetil Knutsen of Bodo Glimt, he's been put forward. Now, neither of those are likely to be made available to us until the end of November, the start of December. So if Celtic were going for either of those two, that would probably need to wait to the end of November, start of December. However, if they were going for Nicky Hyen of Bruges, who a lot of people are putting forward, he could come straight away if Celtic could negotiate with Bruges for a compensation deal. There are quite a lot of there are a few sources saying that Nicky Hyen is actually keen to come to manage in Scottish football. Whether those are true, I don't know, because so many stories you read in the press are a load of nonsense. breezy ice. I think, as I was kind of saying a wee bit earlier on, I think the Danish league actually has some much more than decent teams in their league. I think if Celtic were to go and play in the Danish league, I think it probably would give us a stronger level of opposition on a more regular basis. There is an argument to say that if Hearts do keep on improving, that in the long run this will be good for Celtic as well, because it will mean Celtic have to up their game to do well in Scotland. It certainly would be interesting to see how Celtic did in the Danish league. I think probably over the course of a full season, Celtic would still end up winning the Danish league. But on the evidence of tonight, Midtjylland are a very good, are a good side. I think they surprised a lot of people. They obviously surprised Nottingham Forest by beating them in Nottingham a few weeks ago. I think Martin, part of Hibs certainly ran them close. It was a very late extra time winner that put Midtjylland through against Hibs. I think part of that was both the Midtjylland and Hibs were both kind of in their pre-season phase. I think both teams were settling down. I think the other thing to remember, and I might be slightly wrong with this, Midtjylland did change their manager at the start of the season. They brought in the guy from Borussia Dortmund. Something brought them in from one of the other German teams. So they actually sacked their previous manager, the one who got them high up in the league the previous year, and then they sacked their manager. I don't remember whether they sacked their manager and brought this German guy in just before or just after the Hibs game. But I think when Hibs played Midtjylland, Midtjylland and Hibs were still in their development stage, merging all their sort of pre-season signings and stuff into the side. I would say it was a very disappointing result, and the injury to Osmond is added on to make it even more of a disappointment. The other thing was I was disappointed with so many players on tonight's performance. I thought personally, Austin Trusty got a pass mark, Janiecki got a pass mark, Osmond got a pass mark. Kasper Schmeichel in the first half did make a couple of saves and made a save in the second half. Didn't have much chance with any of the goals, so he got a pass mark. But all the other ones were 5 and below. So don't know what other people thought in terms of marking people, but I thought Trusty had a pretty good game in defence. Janiecki for the first half was good. Osmond showed lots of energy, lots of get up and go. He got Celtic driving forward. He got Celtic 2 of their 3 chances. He had a shot on goal. It was well saved, and then he got the penalty for us. Paul McEwen, I wasn't too surprised to see Tierney play rather than Sirachi. Sirachi apparently did get a knock against Falkirk and was struggling slightly against Rangers, which is why he got brought off about the 70th minute against Rangers to be replaced by Tierney. So I think he was slightly struggling with the after effects of a minor injury against Falkirk. So that might be why he didn't start tonight. And I think that was also the case with Maeda. Maeda had played a lot of the minutes against Rangers, and I think he was slightly struggling from the Rangers game coming to play the game against Midtjylland on the Thursday. So I think that's the reason that Sirachi and Maeda didn't start the game. Wouldn't be too surprised to see both of them back starting the game against Kilmarnock on Sunday. Oops. Yes, so in essence, I think it's the slight difficulty that Martin O'Neill is actually a major difficulty that Martin O'Neill has got as he's come into this squad late in the season, not really knowing terribly many of the players, not really knowing Callum Osman's name or Marcello Sirachi's name before he saw them in training on the Wednesday morning before the Falkirk match. Relying quite a lot, I think, on Sean Maloney, McManus, Strachan, Woods, and Fotheringham, etc., to know who the players are and so on. So I think there's going to be a bit of coming and going and a bit of adaptations and stuff. Oops. So I think whether Martin O'Neill continues for another month or so, whether his last game is going to be the game against Kilmarnock on Sunday, that's another possibility. But I think whoever comes in or whether O'Neill carries on, we're going to have to keep going with this squad throughout November and December and the early part of January, because anybody who's brought in the January transfer window almost certainly going to take a few weeks, a month, couple of months to settle down. We were very, very lucky when Maeda and Hattati and O'Reilly all came in Ange Postecoglou's second window. All of them settled into the team really, really well, and started playing at high quality straight away. We've been lucky with Chinecki. He's come in right at the start, played really well. Quite a lot of the other players who got signed in the transfer window, Nygren, Tierney, etc., have been a bit off and on, hot and cold. Breezy ice, I would again agree very strongly with that as well. I think Celtic should look to get Marcello Sirachi signed as soon as possible. He reportedly is enjoying himself in Scottish football. I think he's a really good player. He's got pace. He's got ability to tackle. He's got ability to run and pass and cross with the ball. He's a pretty decent, strong shot at goals as well. I suspect he also is a player who might be pretty good at corners, free kicks, and penalty kicks. Probably just is a wee bit, couple of inches too short for what I would want in the left back, but Greg Taylor was 2 or 3 inches shorter than that, and he did a good job for Celtic for quite a number of years. I think my personal opinion is that Kieran Tierney will settle down and he will turn into a good Celtic player. Not as good as he was probably when he first played for us. Part of that, he's older, he's got injury problems, but I think Kieran Tierney is still going to turn into a decent player for us. And I think part of the problem with Kieran Tierney has been the chopping and changing in and out the side. Different. He's been asked to play in different ways as well. So I think it's just taking him time to settle back down into the team. So I think personally, in the long run, he's going to settle down. It's actually, if we think about most players when they come into a new club, don't actually start playing brilliantly right from the start. Most players need time to settle down. I think there was a hope that Kieran Tierney would settle down into Celtic's team much quicker because he'd been with us before. He knew the club. He knew the manager at the time. However, most of his teammates from the first time around weren't there for the second time around. So I think it's going to take him time to learn all his teammates, learn how the various players play, where people like Chinecki or Nygren or Osmond or Kenny or Yamada or Iheanacho, where they like the ball, where they like their crosses, etc. David Connor, I would tend to agree with you that I think my personal feeling is that Kieran Tierney, if he can get a run of games, if he can get used to his teammates, used to how Celtic are playing, he's going to turn into a good player for us. And I'm expecting in the second half of the season, if he gets himself fully fit, gets him bedded into the team, gets used to his teammates, he's going to be a strong player for us in the second half of the season. And my contention all along has been that the existing players who were in our squad from last year and from previous years didn't step up and play well enough in the period of August, September, October, etc. Because usually any new players coming to a side need 2 or 3 months to really bed down, get used to a new country, new training regimes, new diet, new this, that, and the other. Sorry. At the moment, I would probably start Sirachi and have Tierney on the bench. That's how I would personally go with it, simply because Sirachi is playing better than Tierney at the moment. I still think it's important to give Kieran Tierney match minutes, because he is more likely to be Celtic's long-term, or one of Celtic's long-term left-backs, unless Celtic in the winter transfer window negotiate with Sirachi and his agent to get him to sign for us in the summer. I suspect if we ask him now, probably before he starts making a real name for himself, and he potentially could make a big name for himself in the World Cup in the summer. So I think we should try and get Sirachi signed. But I do think I would personally start Sirachi at left back for the next wee while, but use Kieran Tierney coming off the bench, be it at left centre back, be it at left back, or maybe even left midfield. He's done a pretty decent job a few times for Scotland in that position as well. He did that position for Arsenal off and on as well. John Ford, the rumours are that Kieran Tierney is the highest paid player at Celtic. Rumours are that he is on £2.6 million a year. At the moment, we're not getting £2.6 million worth of talent out of him. I think in the long run, like in the second half of the season, I think he's going to get better and better. And I think part of him getting better and better is him time sharing with Sirachi for the next wee while. That's a perfectly reasonable point of view, David Stock. And I think that personally, given the fact that Celtic have invested £2.6 million a year in salary, presumably some form of agent fee. So although we got Kieran Tierney for nothing as a free transfer because he was out of contract, I think it would be premature to chuck Kieran Tierney on the scrap heap. I think there'll be a lot of teams who would very happily sign Kieran Tierney to be one of their left backs. Reportedly turned down 3 or 4 high-level teams to come to Celtic, so he showed a real desire to come to Celtic. Stories that Brentford were wanting him, Everton were wanting him, some stories that Newcastle were wanting him as well. But he made a purposeful choice to come to Celtic rather than going to some of the options he had apparently in the English Premier League and in some of the European leagues. I don't think, Sligo Boy, given the fact he's registered to Celtic, that Arsenal would be allowed to give Celtic any money for Kieran Tierney, because you can't be registered with 2 clubs, nor can you get paid by 2 different clubs at the same time, unless it's some form of bonus scheme from having won the title with another club. So my personal feeling is I don't think that would be legal for a player to be paid by 2 different clubs, because I don't think that would be legal or meet the registration rules, etc. Yes, I personally think some. So there are some of us who want to throw Kieran Tierney on the scrap heap. I think We give him time to settle down, get him time to get used to his teammates, get used to being back in Glasgow, being back in the media spotlight. If we remember when Nicholas Kuhn came to us in the January transfer window, he had a pretty disappointing first 2 or 3 months, started to show a bit of form towards the end of the season, and then last season he had a really super season, particularly the first 6 months of last season. So he took a few months to settle down into Scotland, settle down into the team, the training regimes, etc. So I think Kieran Tierney is going to be a good player for Celtic, and I think we give him time to settle down. We give all the new players a time to settle down. Martin, I would tend to agree with that. I think the recruitment, for one reason or another, did take a bit of a nosedive after Ange Postecoglou left. A lot of people do suggest that Ange Postecoglou took a very strong interest in the transfer, scouting, the recruitment, player development. I think he had a bit more of a hands-off way of running training sessions and tactics and stuff. I think he left a lot of the training sessions to people like John Kennedy, Strachan, Stevie Woods, Harry Kewell, etc., and Damien Duff as well. So I think Ange Postecoglou left a lot of the actual running the training sessions to his coaches and assistant manager, which then gave him a lot more time for player recruitment, player scouting, player development, and trying to develop his own players to get better and better to fit in with his style. I think Brendan Rodgers was a much more hands-on manager in terms of running training and being involved in training, and maybe had a bit less of a background role in terms of recruitment and scouting and advising the scouts and the recruitment teams who to go for, etc. That certainly seemed to be the case at previous clubs where Rodgers was the manager as well. He didn't have such a good success with player recruitment at Liverpool and Leicester previous times. So, good evening to you, Brian Rice. What I would say is, my personal feeling was Celtic didn't compete in midfield, didn't get the ball forward properly. We defended pretty well. Well, we defended well for half an hour. Schmeichel made some good saves. We cleared quite a lot of good balls, and then we had a particularly bad 10-15 minutes prior to half-time, conceded 3 goals. Really major deficiencies down the right-hand side, some very poor defending by Ralston, some very poor defending by Engels and Forrest helping him out on the right-hand side. Tuniecki and McGregor Nygren didn't file back well on the left-hand side to support Tierney and Scales on the left-hand side. I think in the second half, Celtic got more back into the game. It was pretty negative and sterile in the second half. We had about 3 chances in the second half. They had about 3 chances in the second half. We scored 1. They scored none in the second half. So overall, disappointing performance. We had chances to get a nice quick start. Engels had a shot on goal in the first minute. Nygren had a shot round about the 16th minute. So we had 2 really good chances to get the goal to go ahead, but wasted both those chances. As soon as they got a proper good chance, they made Schmeichel make a couple of great saves. Then we gave away 3 very disappointing goals, which was, for me, down to quite a number of errors by Ralston, but also some poor team defending from the wide players and the midfielders tracking back to support the full-backs and support the centre-backs. So the problem, David Stocker, in my opinion, is if you get rid of 15 players in the January transfer window, we're bringing in 15 new players, And those 15 new players are going to have to get used to each other, which is going to take months and months and months. What we really need is our existing players, the McGregors, the Hatate, the Maedas, the Johnstons, the Ralstons, etc., 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 for them to play well, to allow the new players to come in and get used to everything. And that's not been the case. The players we got in over the summer have all taken time to get settled into Scottish football. Some of them have played well sometimes and not so well the next time. Negan's a really good example. Very hot and cold. Some great matches for Celtic. He is our top scorer. He is our top assists creator. But he's had some very poor games. Tonight he had a very poor game. Whether that's because we didn't play him in the role that he's been playing so well in the last couple of games, we just seem to lose all control of the midfield. All right. I haven't actually had a proper chance of. I did listen to Martin O'Neill's, or watch Martin O'Neill's short interview on Celtic TV on a YouTube video. That's the only thing I've actually seen. I haven't seen any other post-match interviews or post-match comments. Certainly, Martin O'Neill didn't make any mention of Engels being injured. The only person he mentioned was only person he mentioned was Kyle Mosman being injured with a hamstring problem. But I dare say we'll find out. Dare say we'll find out if Engels is injured. Probably on Friday in the press conference. Breezy Eyes, I think my personal opinion, and everyone's going to have a different opinion, or some of you will have a different opinion. I think Celtic will give whoever the new manager is a nice big transfer chest in January and an even bigger transfer chest in the summer. Otherwise, there's no point in bringing the new manager in because he's obviously got to develop his own team, bring in the players he wants to bring in, get rid of the players he doesn't want. I think there may be a few players who might well naturally leave Celtic in the winter transfer window. Wouldn't be too surprised if Hatate goes. Yang's another player I think is probably likely to go in the winter transfer window. Dyson Maida, there are different stories as to whether he wants to leave or wants to stay. I think possibly if he's looking to the World Cup, he might want to stay at Celtic. That way he's got pretty much, as long as he's fit, a guarantee that he's going to be playing most games between now and the summer World Cup. Brian Riceout, I think Tierney's had some good spells with so far since he came back to us. Some not so good spells. However, Sirachi has been our best left back all season, and he would be the one that I would put in as my starting left back with Tierney coming off the bench. Tierney obviously can cover left back, can cover centre back, could even play a wee bit of midfield if we were going a bit more defensive. I think Tierney has had some good spells, but I think he's been struggling for full match sharpness and fitness. But I think Tierney's very much worthwhile persisting. And I think in the second half of the season, if he can get match sharpness and match fitness and some consistency up, I think he's going to be a good player for us in the second half of the season. As I've said earlier on, I really would like Celtic to sign Sirachi permanently. I haven't seen anybody mentioning John McGlynn as a future Celtic manager. I think there's it would be an interesting choice. I personally don't think that the majority of Celtic fans would be happy with McGlynn coming in to be the manager. I think what the majority of the Celtic fans want is a big name to come in. So Ange Postecoglou is a big name. Nicky Hyen of Bruges, big name. Kjetil Knutsen of Bodo Glimt, big name. Reputations with high manager with high reputations. Wilfred Nancy, who's managing in America, he's won 2 trophies in 2 seasons with Columbus Crew. American Major League Soccer is a decent level of football. American international side is a more than decent international team. The majority of their players play in Major League Soccer. So if Columbus Crew are one of the best teams in America, he's the manager. He is a manager with good success. Whether he would adapt to Scotland, I don't know. From what I've heard of him, he tends to play a 3-4-3, which would be a different sort of formation. Hyen of Bruges likes playing a 4-2-3-1. I think with Celtic's players, a 4-2-3-1 would work really well. Probably to play 4-2-3-1, he would be looking for a strong midfield enforcer, a ball winner midfielder, which might then allow Callum McGregor to be a bit more creative. Yes, you're quite right. Gordon Strachan, in some form of speaking engagement, did talk about December as being when the manager would come in. That certainly would buy into it being Kjetil Knutsen of Bodø Glimt, because his contract with them ends at the very end of November. Wilfred Nyancy of Columbus Crew in America, his contract will end around about that same time as well, because the American soccer season finishes at the end of November, start of December. Well, apparently I didn't know that Efren Juarez was doing a good job. Apparently, he's doing a very good job as a manager. He actually has ruffled a lot of feathers, supposedly, with his club. So I don't think he is a yes man. However, maybe he would be if he came to Scottish football. I don't personally see Efren Juarez as being the manager. But then when Ange Postecoglou came to Celtic in the 21-22 season, I'd never properly heard of Postecoglou before. I'd heard of his name as the international manager for Australia, but he wasn't a name that I'd particularly heard. It wasn't a name I expected Celtic to choose. And Postecoglou had 2 brilliant seasons as manager of Celtic. So I think it's one can't rule out somebody as being any good because we haven't particularly heard of them before. People can come from other levels of football, other countries, and manage very well in Scotland. Ange Postecoglou being a great example. Managed in Japan, managed in Australia, internationally and club football in Australia, came to Scotland, and he was a brilliant manager for us. So great to have you on the live stream, Michael McCafferty. Just also to say to everybody, making plans to potentially stop the live stream somewhere around about midnight at the latest, simply because I've got a busy day on Friday, and so I do need a wee bit of sleep. Just the last couple we've been going on 1:30 in the morning. So just to say at this point, I'm planning to finish the live stream around about midnight. Obviously, we're having a really nice chat at midnight. We can extend it a wee bit longer. So great to have you on, Michael McCafferty. It was a disappointing game. For me, we didn't get control of midfield, and not having control of midfield meant that we didn't get any control of the game. We couldn't really get the ball out of defence and to attack to take some of the pressure off the defence. I thought the defence did a good job for the first half hour or so, and then they got overwhelmed. And I think also in that spell where we got overwhelmed for 10-15 minutes, our midfielders and our wide players weren't getting back to support the defenders, and that's part. And Midtjylland were committing more and more players into the box, and so the defenders that we did have were getting more and more overloaded with players to mark and players, other players being first to the rebounds, first to the deflections, first to the passes. The only person that I know have read what the salary for is Michael Nicholson, who reportedly is on something like £700,000 a year. People like Peter Lawwell and the other directors and board members don't actually get paid as such. People like Lawwell might well get things like expenses paid because he does travel all over Europe, particularly attending UEFA things, FIFA things, various other things. He also is part of things like sponsorship and merchandising, so going to meet Adidas and various other different people. So, but in terms of actually getting paid, Lawwell is as the chairman, doesn't really get paid as such by Celtic other than expenses, etc. However, Nicholson, around about £700,000 a year supposedly, but you're entirely right. In the proper financial statements, which come out generally every April, but will be available for the AGM in a few weeks' time, it should actually list what everyone's salaries are, because that's generally part of any submissions to the stock exchange, given the fact Celtic are a PLC. Salaries, etc., has to be part of that, and we usually do also break down player salaries and so on as well. So we should get confirmation, not necessarily now, of what Kieran Tierney and Jota are getting, but reportedly Jota is on £1.92 million a year. Reportedly Kieran Tierney is £2.6 million a year, which makes them the two highest paid players at Celtic, slightly ahead of Callum McGregor, who's on £34,000 a week, along with Carter Vickers, according to what's available on the internet. In terms of, someone was making a comment there about, it's kind of gone through my screen, but bonuses, well, all bonuses are dependent on Celtic delivering on the pitch. And if Celtic deliver on the pitch, they also deliver off the pitch. So it's actually in the interest of the financial officer, Michael Nicholson, etc., to deliver, to get Celtic to deliver the maximum on the pitch, because that boosts all the income coming into the club. So the more that Celtic wins on the pitch, the more Celtic wins off the pitch as well. So Michael Nicholson's bonuses, if he is on bonuses, which he probably is, like most people in any organisation, you get bonuses for achieving certain targets. Part of his targets are dependent on Celtic winning cups, winning leagues, Champions League, all these things. So it could well be that Michael Nicholson has lost a bonus because Celtic didn't get into the Champions League. We don't know these things because, like many people's contracts, like your contract, my contract, when I was working, they're not generally shared with members of the public, and they're not generally shared with other workmates either. It's unfortunately Sligo Boy and unfortunately Michael McCafferty, us old folk, we can remember when Celtic were the best in the world, winning the. Well, I wasn't quite born when Celtic won the European Cup in '67, in May '67. I was born 2 months after that, but certainly Jock Stein's team in the late '60s, going into the early '70s, was one of the best in Europe, one of the best in the world. I think, unfortunately, due to the way that finances are, the way that TV contracts are, the way that sponsorship is, the way where outside funding from billionaires from Qatar and Saudi and America and Russia, etc., I think that's changed the whole nature of football. And I think, unfortunately, the gap between really big, rich clubs and other clubs is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So I think, unfortunately, that most of the world is going to get further and further behind the English league, the Spanish league, the German league, the Italian league. And the way things are going, the amount of money in the English league is putting them further and further ahead of everybody else. So if we're looking at our bench actually tonight, we had Daizenmaid on the bench, we had Callum Osman on the bench, we had Rio Hitati on the bench. So all three players are good players. Balakwisha admittedly hasn't really started very well for Celtic. But then neither Nicholas Kuhn didn't start very well for Celtic in his first half a dozen 10 games. He took quite a long time to settle down. Paulo Bernardo's been a very disappointing player for Celtic. He was particularly good in his loan season. When he got signed as a permanent player, he hasn't really kicked on and developed as we had hoped he would do. Partly that's due to injuries, partly is due to he's not got quite so many starts as one would expect he would have done. But we actually had some quality to come off the bench. We had Sirachi still on the bench, and we've all agreed that Sirachi's been one of Celtic's best players so far this season. Good evening to you as well, Lauren. Yes, I was when I was planning this live stream and planning things to talk about. I was actually before the game, obviously, when I was planning it yesterday and this morning. I was thinking, oh yes, it'll be nice and positive. We'll have got a draw. Maybe if we played especially well, we might have got a surprise win. But my personal feeling was if Celtic played at or near their good form, we would have got a draw out of tonight's match. I was partly surprised. I thought Midtjylland actually were better than I thought they were. I thought the quality of players was better than I thought it was. However, I maybe was forgetting that they actually are. They've got 4 wins out of 4 so far in this Europa League, including winning away from home at Notts Forest. Yes. So I think what's I partly agree with that. I think Celtic do need to concentrate on maximising their domestic form. So nice confidence building game against Kilmarnock, sending all the players who are on international duty off, keeping the other half of the squad at the club, hopefully getting, if we're lucky, Iheanacho and Johnson back fit for 2 weeks later against St Mirren. A lot of rumours saying that Celtic will try and get their new manager in during this international break. Give him a week with give him half a week with the players coming back off international duty, a whole week with the ones who are not on international duty. And so I agree that Celtic probably for the period of the rest of November, December, January probably should concentrate more on the domestic football rather than Europa League. However, I think if Celtic are showing really good form in domestic football, that has a knock-on effect to help them in Europa League football. One of the problems I think also Celtic's got at the moment is we have had I think we also had, unfortunately at the moment, rather a lot of problems with injuries. That happens always in any squad, but we have had quite a number of top-level players, experienced players, key players, all out at the same time. Johnston, Carter-Vickers, Jota, Maeda out for a couple of weeks as well. At the time we didn't really need them to be out. Iheanacho then gets injured. Callum Osman's now got himself injured. Someone was suggesting possibly that Arnie Engels has got a bit of a knock. Sirachi has had a wee bit of a knock against Falkirk and couldn't manage to get through the whole game against Rangers on Sunday. Well, I think, Brian Wright, I think the more a player plays in a team, the more he gets used to his teammates, the more he gets used to the tactics. So, yes, giving a player time to settle down and get used to everybody he's playing with is really important. And he is going to get better if he gets used to who he's playing with. Because Midtjylland, they've had a strong central squad that they've kept on adding a few players here and there. They've lost a few players, gained a few players, but they've kept a central core and they've developed that further and further. And if those players who are pre-existing have got good bonds, good partnerships, good understanding, that helps new players come in and bed down as well. So I think that players do get better and better. Nicholas Kuhn is a really good example of a player who struggled to start with at Celtic, got better and better. Not every player comes in and starts setting the heather on fire, playing brilliantly right from the start. Well, it would depend on if the new manager is a good manager. He then chooses who his best players are going to be. He puts square pegs into square holes, round pegs into round holes, and then if he is interchanging players, he changes the system to accommodate the players he's got. Really good managers get their players, develop a system, and adapt the system to fit the players they've actually got. And when they do change players, they change their system as well. They don't get stuck in one way of playing football, one formation, one style, and then everybody is square pegs and round holes and round pegs and square holes. You need to keep on adapting. You need to keep on changing. And good managers adapt their systems so that players fit into the whole system. And one of the beauties of Ange Postecoglou's system, he did allow players to have quite a lot of individual brilliance within that. He allowed players to do to do things which are a bit risky, a bit dangerous, without be imaginative, but also ad-libbing type of things as well, going out with the usual tactics, etc. Which is why I think Jota was particularly good in that system. Daisamai was good in that system. Lila Bada, who have no longer got, he was good in that system. They changed the way they played. Ange Postecoglou let them take risks, particularly Jota. Jota did a lot of quite dangerous, risky runs, passes, etc. A lot of brilliant things, a few mistakes along the way. Certainly, at the moment, Celtic squad is a bit stretched. With the strikers that we chose originally in our original 25, with possibly some might say maybe too many midfielders, maybe an extra centre back more than we required. It did leave us a bit short in terms of striking options. I think the plan was that players like Maeda, Nygren, Balikwisha, Chinyeki could all cover several different positions. That's why those players were chosen as midfielders and wide midfielders, because they could also cover forward positions. Certainly when Callum Osman went off and we went down to 10 men because we'd done all our subs, it was Balikwisha who went up front to play as a central striker, and he certainly has played central striker or a second striker on a regular basis in previous football teams. Nygren's played second striker and main striker in previous times in Danish and Swedish football. So we have actually got players who can, like Maeda, step into that central role. So, according to my internet search earlier this evening, Kieran Tierney is on a 5-year deal at Celtic at £2.6 million a year. So, theoretically, Celtic have committed £13 million to him. Yes. I think the Brian Rice, I would agree with you and with Lauren. I think a 5-year contract for Kieran Tierney with his injury problems was probably a bit risky. Probably something along the lines of 2 years with a 2-year contract with a rolling 3rd, 4th, 5th year option. That might be that would be more of a reasonable thing. Certainly committing 5 years to him did seem an overly ambitious thing. A lot of people felt that Brendan Rodgers was particularly keen to get Kieran Tierney back into his Celtic framework. Rodgers tried his absolute hardest to get Tierney signed for Celtic in the previous winter window. Went through a lot of hoops to try and get Tierney signed as on loan for the remainder of that season prior to coming to us as a free agent in the summer, but that all fell through. So I think Rodgers was particularly keen to get Tierney into the team, and it may be that he wouldn't have agreed to come to Celtic unless he was given a 4 or 5 year contract. So well, Lauren, and you've got your opinions are always very, very good, and your opinion may well be right. I personally don't get that feeling from Kieran Tierney. I think he came back to Celtic because he loves Celtic. Remembering that when Kieran Tierney had any days off from Arsenal, he would come back and watch Celtic from the stands and from the terraces. I think he still has a great love of Celtic. I think he is a Celtic player. I think he's a massive Celtic fan. I think he was keen to come back to Celtic. Reportedly turned down several good offers from English Premier League sides, teams in Spain and Germany. He made a apparent, definite commitment. He wanted to come back to Celtic rather than going anywhere else. So I don't think he's here for a payday. I don't think that's the nature of Kieran Tierney. I think he could have got more money at several different English Premier League clubs. He took a pretty big wage cut coming from Arsenal, £110,000 a week, to Celtic, reportedly £50,000 a week. I'm sure he would have got a pretty big salary at Brentford and Newcastle and Everton and various clubs in Spain. So yes, I think, as I think I was saying a wee bit earlier on in the live stream, I think Celtic do lack physicality in midfield. I was harking back to the good old days of Lambert and Lennon and Wanyama and Brown. Somebody who would be a physical presence in midfield, someone who would mix things up, maybe make a few challenges. And I thought in the game against Rangers on Sunday, we did show some of that combative, aggressive performance in midfield. But today, all our 5 midfielders who played were all really poor. None of them really competed. I thought Scales and Trusty did a pretty good job being physical in central defence. But our 5 midfielders that we played at various different points, none of them showed any physicality. Ralston didn't show much physicality with his wide player. I didn't really get the feeling that they were getting much purchase down Kieran Tierney's side of the pitch, partly because they were getting so much advantage coming down Anthony Ralston's side of the pitch. And that was partly for me because Forrest and Engels in the first half weren't coming across to help Ralston with that wide player. I think Alex Valley. It would have been great to keep Alex Valley, but I don't think there was ever an opportunity for us to keep Alex Valley. Barcelona were very keen to keep him, and then he's off now to Como in Italy. I don't think he was ever destined to be at Celtic for more than 6 months or 12 months. Yes, so I fully agree, Green for goal. I think Celtic aren't nearly as physical as they need to be. Yes, Brian Wright, I think, make a good point. I think a lot of Sim and Midtjylland were a good, strong physical side. It was something that was very noticeable when they were doing long throws into the box and corners into the box and free kicks into the box, that in general terms, all their players were bigger, taller, stronger, more physical, more robust physiques, etc., than Celtic's players. Celtic had a couple of players who were that bit bigger and stronger, etc., but the other team, Midtjylland, had lots of players who were bigger, stronger, more physical in the box, and they also were bigger, stronger, and more physical in their own box defensively and in midfield as well. And I think Celtic are lacking physicality. Sorry, just catching up some of these comments. Yes, I think Ange Postecoglou was a sort of combination of a fairly old-fashioned manager and a new-fashioned manager. I think one of the things Ange Postecoglou particularly liked doing was player recruitment, player scouting, player identification. I think he developed a really good training system. It's worked well wherever he's gone. I think at Spurs, I think it was working well, except he got so many injuries at Spurs that they had an especially poor season last season. However, they did win the Europa League last season, despite the fact they had a disappointing league season and a lot of injuries. But I think he developed a system that was easy for the coaches to understand, easy for the players to understand. I think the players bought into his system. I think the players are buying into Martin O'Neill's system. But it's going to take time for any changes that O'Neill and Maloney and Fotheringham bring in. Which is why I think the sooner that Celtic get a permanent new manager in with his team of coaches, etc., probably keeping a few of Celtic's existing coaches for continuity, and also so that the new manager, new coaches get to know the players who are there already quicker and better. So I think personally we need to get a new manager in the next 2 to 4 weeks personally. Hail to you, Tony McVeigh, as well. Thank you for your nice, friendly, positive positive comments. As I've said a few times, this is a live stream for pleasant, polite, respectful comments. No name calling, no nastiness, no. And I think that my personal feeling is what we should be discussing is how Celtic are now, how Celtic are going to get better, how Celtic are going to cope with the injuries that they're having to cope with at the moment. Is there presumably over the next cab up on in line to be one of our striker options is now going to be Shin Yamada, one would guess. Really good couple of seasons in Japanese football, good enough to get him into the Japanese international side. I thought when he was given some spells off the bench early in the season, I thought he showed quite a lot of promise. Obviously, quite a big change in lifestyle for him, moving from Japan to Scotland, learning a new language, learning lots of new players, different system, different training, different everything. So going to take him time to settle down. I think any player moving from one team to another, moving back to a team with lots of different teammates, different tactics, different players from players that he used to play with, even if you're coming back to your home city, I'm sure there are some of you who have moved jobs from one company to another, or if you're school teachers, from one school to another, or hospital to another, or whatever you do. Even though you're still living in the same city, but you've moved from one company to another, one factory to another, or whatever it might be, it takes you time to get used to your new teammates, your new fellow colleagues within an organization, even if you're still in the same city as you used to be. That's why it takes time to bed down, takes time to... Hello to you, Typhoon McFlustery, as well. Typhoon McFlustery, you make a really, really good, interesting debating point, and I think it's something that is really worthwhile discussing. It is actually, I think it's an interesting time for Scottish football, in that at the moment Hearts are showing signs of being a good side. They seem to have done a good job of mixing the players they had from before with new players they've brought in with their apparently different form of scouting and player recruitment and player identification. There are quite a lot of clubs around Europe who are smaller clubs who are particularly good at recruitment, particularly good at player development, developing players internally, bringing in players from smaller leagues, less fashionable leagues, and then fitting them into the team and then merging them really well with the players who are there already. Hearts seem to have done a good job of that so far this season. So to answer your point, if Hearts keep on progressing and keep on getting better, I think that also helps Celtic keep on getting better as well. I think there's been a degree of within Celtic on the pitch and off the pitch, possibly the last season or two, of being a bit complacent, a bit entitled. We've won the league so many times, we'll just keep on winning the leagues if we turn up. I think that's possibly something that could have been accused of Celtic in the second half of last season. There were quite a lot of games where it felt like Celtic just kind of felt they had to turn up, and they would beat St Johnstone, they would beat Aberdeen in the final. After all, we'd thumped them just a couple of weeks before that cup final defeat on penalties. We'd thumped Aberdeen up at Pittodrie. So I think Celtic's performances the last 6 months have been, or the last 9 months rather, have rather been hot and cold. And this season there's been an awful lot of cold performances, not many warm performances. Alexander Cunningham, I think you're entirely right in terms of where Scottish football is in terms of UEFA coefficients now, where Scottish football is in terms of things like TV money, sponsorship money, merchandising money. We are third division, and although Celtic is a really, really big club, we still are in a country's league, which is in essence, in terms of UEFA rankings, FIFA rankings, in terms of the amount of money that TV companies want to give to it to televise the league games, the amount of money that sponsors want to give to put their names on the back of shirts and the front of shirts, etc. We're a third division league. I think that there is a potential of being of teams like Celtic, much like teams in Belgium, Norway, etc., to break out of that by being particularly good at player recruitment, player development. And I don't think Celtic over recent seasons have been very good at bringing through their own players from talented kids from Scotland and around the UK and Ireland, etc. I don't think we've done a good job of bringing players through, and our recruitment hasn't been as strong as it needs to be. It's been rather hit and miss. We've had some good signings, some poor signings, and we've had some confusing signings. We've had some signings that didn't look very good to start with and have turned out to be very good signings, and some good signings that looked like there'll be very good signings who've been very disappointing signings. Virtually every club, whoever signs a player, is a bit hit and miss. Some players settle well, some people don't settle well, some people start playing well straight away, some take a long time to get going. So, Typhoon McFlush, I think Scottish football is at the moment probably on the decline, largely due to the fact that there's not the general quality of Scottish football has gone down and down and down. The general quality of young Scottish players coming through has gone down. A lot of good Scottish young players go off to play in other countries. I think Scottish football struggles because our TV contract is low, our sponsorship ability is low, and I think also the level of competition for Celtic over the last decade, 15 years or so, has been rather poor, and we've won pretty much every league title for the last 15 years, apart from that post-COVID season where everything fell apart, and then Ange Postecoglou revived things. But I do think personally that what we require is, several people have put forward, I think we need a new young manager, maybe around about their 40s, who has an attacking style of football, different ideas of how to play football, who also is able to bring young players through from academy and B team football into first team football, merge those players into the team. Also a good manager for operating on a medium budget and developing those players, selling them on, and having a sort of a conveyor belt of bringing in good players. And for that, you also require good scouting department, good recruiting department as well. So I think there are quite a number of sides of teams within the Celtic club that need to get a lot better. And it could well be, as Ange Postecoglou did, he was kind of a new broom. He brought in a lot of different methods. He brought in different style of football. He brought in a few scouts and recruitment people with him, most of whom have gone now. He brought in some new sports scientists and analysts. Again, a lot of them have moved on. I would personally, Brian Rice, I agree with a lot of what you're saying there. I think Kjetil Knutsen would be, although he is a wee bit older than my ideal age for manager, in that he's into his 50s, which is that wee bit older. I know quite a lot of us are older than that. Not much older than Kjetil Knutsen, but he is certainly a manager with a lot of really good ideas. He is a manager really, really good at developing players, bringing them through his academy and through Norwegian youth football into the first team. He's been very good at buying in players from other clubs in other countries and developing them. And he's also been really good at integrating new players continually into his system and adapting and changing his team and keeping it going and going and going. Marco Rose, I think he would be a really top-level manager. I would be quite surprised if he would come to Celtic. I was watching something earlier on that's saying Celtic should break the bank to get Jurgen Klopp to be the manager. I think our chances of getting Jurgen Klopp to be the manager if Celtic are playing in the Scottish Premiership are zero. If Celtic were playing in some sort of pan-European league, I think we'd be able to attract a far higher calibre of manager. I think with Celtic playing in the Scottish Premiership, which is where we play at the moment, along with playing in Europe in various different competitions, I think if we were playing in a higher quality of league, we would be able to attract higher quality of players and higher quality of managers. But because we're playing in, as someone was suggesting, a third division, a third tier league, if we're talking about European, putting all the European leagues into tiers. I think we're a third tier league compared to the top tiers of France, Germany, Italy, England, Spain. Second tier countries like Holland, Portugal, Belgium, etc. Yes, and if in the old days Celtic could find good, talented players from all around Scotland, all around Britain, Ireland, a few players coming from further afield. We were really good at finding players from all over the place. We were good at developing our young players. Jockstein did a brilliant job, or Celtic in the time of Jockstein. So his backroom staff did a great job of identifying young players, develop them through the academy and the reserve team in those days, the Douglashes, the Maccaris, the Connollys, etc. Good at bringing in players from other teams like Dixie Deans, Harry Hood, etc., etc. So in the past we've done it, and if Bodo Glimt in Norway can do it, if Midtjylland and Brøndby and Copenhagen in Denmark can do it, so can Celtic. And I think it's a question of finding the right manager, the right recruitment people, and the right scouting people, and letting them do their job properly. Part of the problem Celtic might well have also is recruiting people who are that high level of recruitment team and high level of scouting people. Also can be sometimes having someone who previously was a Celtic player or a Celtic coach who moves over into recruitment or scouting, etc., and then shows a particular talent for that side of things. It's a definite possibility. It depends really how various people who are part of the decision makers at Celtic, which would appear to be primarily Dermot Desmond at the moment. However, with Dermot Desmond having 34% of the shares, it means that anything that Dermot Desmond wants to do, other people have to back him up. Otherwise, he's not going to have the votes on the board to push things through. So maybe sacking someone like Michael Nicholson, sacking someone like Mackay, the chief financial officer, maybe those are both good moves. However, if we sack them, we have to bring in someone else to do those jobs, which may well also cause an awful lot of problems at Celtic. It would appear certainly changing the recruitment head and the scouting head from Ange Postecoglou's time into Brendan Rodgers' time, that did seem to mean Celtic's recruitment and scouting, etc., got poorer. Again, all these things multifactorial, factors on the board, factors within the coaching staff, the management staff, the playing staff, the recruitment staff, the scouting staff. When things go wrong, it tends to be lots of people's problem because the teams all those various different teams aren't working together. Yep. So Clashman Numpty, I would tend to agree. Knutson and Hayden, both managers who have proven it at a good high level. Both managers who've succeeded in Europe. They've both succeeded more so with Bodo Glimt with a relatively small budget. They have done all the right things, developed their own players, bought players, made them better, sold them on, bought new players in, made them better, and kept the club moving further and further and forwards. Well, the thing, Clashman Numpty, is we will never ever find out whether Celtic would win the Danish league because we can't be in the Danish league. So it's a wee bit of a moot point whether we can or we can't. Yes, I agree. Copenhagen, Brøndby, Midtjylland, all good sides. But remember, last season Celtic were taking on Bayern Munich. We were beating RB Leipzig. We drew with Bruges, the team that Nicky Hayden, who may be Celtic's new manager, his team. We drew with pretty much the same team. We drew with Bruges 1-1 last season. That's the side that thumped Rangers over 2 legs at the start of this season. So, and most of the players that we had in last year's Champions League are still at the club. I'm not saying all of the players, but most of the players that we started this season, were the ones that finished last season and were the ones that did well in the Champions League. Obviously, we've had 1 or 2 players move on, Kuhn, Kyogo, although Kyogo wasn't such a force in the Champions League last season. Yes, Pat McLaughlin, I think at the moment Scottish football is in a bit of the doldrums. I think potentially if Hearts get stronger and stronger, I think that will push Celtic to get stronger and stronger. I think part of the problem that Celtic has had, for one reason or another, is a lack of competition from other Scottish teams to keep on pushing them forwards. I think succeeding in Europe, my personal opinion, is difficult for anybody outside the big 5 leagues to do. And as well as Bruges have done, as well as Bodo Glimt have done, as well as all those other clubs have done, none of them have reached the real final stages of the Champions League. The last team out with the top big 5 leagues in Europe to win the Champions League was Porto way back in 2004. So we're talking well over 20 years since a team outside the big super rich leagues have won the Champions League. And as someone was saying earlier on, the gap between the really rich clubs, the medium rich clubs, is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. The amount of money that clubs in England and Spain particularly, and to a lesser extent Germany, Italy and France get from TV money and sponsorship is quite obscene. Plus, a lot of those clubs have also got incredibly rich benefactors behind them as well to bankroll them. Yes, there's Dr. Strangelove. I think you're echoing points I've hopefully tried to get across. I know a lot of people don't seem to understand where I'm coming from. As I've said, I think the problems at Celtic are multifactorial. Lots of different people have not been performing as well as they should do. Players haven't been performing as well as they should do. Managers and coaches haven't been performing. Scouts, recruitment, board members, financial people. Those people have not been doing their jobs as well as they can. Our player development to bring through schoolboys, teenagers, etc., players in their late teens, early 20s into the first team, that's not been good enough. And it's been a long, long time since we were good enough in our own player development. Most of the teams who are really, really strong have got really good academy structures to bring through players through. Midtjylland, quite a few of their players that played today are players who've been at the club for a long, long time. The player who gave Anthony Ralston a real nightmare this game, who seems to have different names, but according to his official name is Kruger Johnson, although he had a different name on the back of his shirt. He's a player that's come through their system. 2 or 3 of their players have come through their youth system and good enough to be into the first team. And we have really struggled to get players to come through and be real forces into our first team. And at the moment, it doesn't really look like I haven't seen anything. Haven't seen anything about that personally. I would be personally very, very happy if Knutsen came in. I'd be surprised if Knutsen came in the next few days, in that his season with Bodo Glimt has another something like 3 weeks, 4 weeks to go, because their season finishes the very end of November. I think they're currently lying second, and they actually are in second place, so they're kind of second favourites to win the title. I think they had a disappointing result at the weekend. So I think if what you're saying is true, Dexter, I would be personally very happy. I think he ticks an awful lot of the boxes for what Celtic needs. New ideas, forward-thinking attacking manager, good at working in teams, good at bringing people together, good at bringing young players through, good at bringing players in from outside and developing them, good at keeping on rotating and bringing in new players over season after season after season. And Knutsen at Bodo Glimt has delivered success year after year after year after year. Well, it's certainly been interesting to see that Kairat Almaty have, now that they've got a bit more used to Champions League football, they've got better and better. They lost 2-1 to Inter Milan on Wednesday or Tuesday. Paphos, the Cypriot champion, they won Champions League game just yesterday as well. So I think if Kairat Almaty can get a 2-1 defeat to Inter Milan, if Paphos can get to win over a stronger, more fancy team, I think I think Celtic could have. I also think, again, this is my personal opinion, based on some stories from other sources, which may or may not have been true, that had Celtic got that Champions League place against Kairat Almaty guaranteed, that there were a few players lined up to come in who had agreed to come if Celtic got Champions League football, but didn't get Champions League football, and those players backed out of tentative preliminary deals, which is why we then got in the players that we got in at the last minute, and that was particularly the last few days were a bit of a mess, all things considered. Although we did get Sebastian Chinecki literally with a few minutes to spare, and I think he is a good player at Celtic. I think he's going to be a player that's going to get better and better at Celtic, particularly when he gets fully settled into the side. Thank you for all these comments. Struggling to keep up with all the comments, so if I do miss out any comments, etc., so it's just there are so many great comments in the comment section. I'm not ignoring anybody. Yes, Typhoon McFluster, I think this is a sort of recurring theme of most of us in this live stream, is that at the moment Sirachi is playing better than Kieran Tierney. Sirachi certainly seemed to get the Martin O'Neill ways very quickly. He played well against Falkirk. He had a really good game, I thought, for the most part against Rangers. Did think he maybe at the end of towards the last 15, 20 minutes of the Rangers match, he was starting to look a bit tired and leggy, which is when Tierney was brought on to replace him. Wondered whether that might have been the reason he didn't start tonight, or whether O'Neill thought that Tierney was a better bet because he's a few inches taller, a bit of a better defender maybe than Sirachi. But not that really our left back or our right back got much chance to do much attacking at all today. against Midtjylland. And partly because the midfield, I thought, did a rubbish job of getting the ball and keeping the ball and passing. And Celtic's stats for passing were really rather poor. So these were Celtic stats for the game against Midtjylland today. 294 passes. Now, in most games, Celtic have 500 passes is what Celtic typically do in games in Scottish football. That's the number of passes roughly that they had against Sturm Graz. 294 passes in the whole game, which is actually a very low number for Celtic. I thought the most important thing, however, even with a poor number of passes, our accuracy was 69.4. That's usually well up into the 80s, high 80s. And so I think our passing was really poor. Now, that's primarily the job of the midfielders and the wide players for passes. Our balance of forward passes, backward passes, and sideway passes actually was pretty good in terms of the small number of passes, but 29 successful passes in the final third and only 7 crosses. Both of those are massively down on what Celtic ordinarily gets in games. And I think that's a large part of why Celtic didn't do well. Other really major stats from today's game: possession was 60-40. Again, typically Celtic in any other game this season, it's been the other way around, or Celtic's had 70% to 30%. So clearly Midtjylland dominated us, much more possession than us. And having much more possession, what's more, they were much more creative with it. 24 shots to 5. They had 12 on targets out there, 24. They forced Kasper Schmeichel into 9 saves. We only forced 2 saves. 52 touches in the box to 13. So Midtjylland outplayed us, outpassed us, outplayed us. They used the ball far better. They got the ball out wide. They got the ball into the middle. And what's more, I thought was important is they got so many players into the box. And Celtic tonight just didn't get anybody into the box to support Kenny or support Osmond. Our midfielders didn't get into the box. Our wide players didn't get into the box. Our fullbacks didn't get forward. And I think the passing stats and the general stats all show that Midtjylland were the better side by far on the night. Now, sometimes you can get away with poorer passing stats, poorer possession stats, etc., by being super efficient in terms of putting away your chances. Celtic didn't put away their chances apart from the penalty kick we forced them into 2 saves. We hit a couple of shots over the bar, a couple of shots past the post. Football is life. I think on tonight's performance, Ralston was our poorest player on the pitch. There were quite a few other players that were rivaling him for being equally poor. I thought Engels was rubbish. Nygren was rubbish. I thought McGregor was very, very disappointing. Forrest, Kenny, Maeda, Hattati, Balikwisha, Palabernardo, all were rather disappointing for me on the night. I think Kasper Schmeichel started the game pretty well, made some nice good saves. I thought his distribution later in the game got rather poor and rather hurried. So, Kenneth Todd, I agree with everything you say there. But apart from maybe the last bit, I think the board do know that they need to commit good finances to the new manager in the January window and similarly in the summer window. Because, as I was saying a wee bit earlier on, if Celtic do well on the pitch, Celtic are doing well off the pitch. If Celtic do well on the pitch, they get into the Champions League, they get through the Champions League qualifiers, they get bigger money in the Champions League, more TV money in the Champions League. It theoretically also boosts things like hospitality, sponsorship, shirt sponsorship, football kit deals with Adidas or whomever. All these things, one thought follows into the other. And I do think personally that the board are fully aware that committing money to bring in players, to bring in the best manager, but also I think as well as doing those things, I do think we do need to improve things massively in terms of recruitment, player development, and player scouting. I think those departments over the last few years, possibly even longer, have all been disappointingly poor. And quite a lot of the teams who are from smaller leagues, where they're really capitalising is in recruitment, development, scouting, and developing their own players through their academy systems. And I think those are things that we've not done a very good job with. And I think those are also very important, as well as signing as good a quality players as we can, getting the best manager we can. I think we also do need to do those behind the scenes things far better as well. Football is life. I'm not saying Tierney played well. I don't think Tierney was half as bad as many of the other players on the side, but he wasn't one of the players I would have given that good marks to. I'm not saying Tierney played well. I don't think he played badly. I don't think he had a chance to get forward where he is stronger. He and Chinecki were jointly responsible for letting the guy at the back post score that third goal. I think a lot of Celtic's problems came down to the fact that we weren't defending well down the right-hand side. Forrest, Engels, Ralston. By the time it came to the second half, Maeda did come back a bit to defend, but they weren't attacking as much down that side. Good point, Typhon McFlustery. I think from here, where we go from here is we keep on going forwards. We keep on going forwards under Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney and Fotheringham, etc., for as long as required. I think we get in a brand new manager as soon as possible. Ideally, for me, that would be over the next 13 days after the Kilmarnock game on Sunday. If, as Dexter was suggesting earlier on, there are strong stories that Knutsen is coming in, be it in the next couple of weeks or be it in December. If it was Knutsen, that would very much tie in with what Gordon Strachan said in one of his after-dinner speaking engagements, where he said that Celtic are looking to bring in a fresh manager with new ideas, etc., in December. So that would certainly fit in with that. It doesn't really fit in with it being Kieran McKenna, in that he's under contract with Ipswich for about 3 or 4 more years. But certainly signing Knutsen as a manager fits in with that rumour, that story that Gordon Strachan probably shouldn't have released. Good. Dexter, if what you're saying is true, I didn't actually have a proper chance to read all the Celtic news stuff before I started the live stream. I was trying to do, because I've got a busy day tomorrow, I was trying to do a few things I would ordinarily do tomorrow morning. I was doing them tonight instead. If Knutsen's coming in, that would be brilliant. Yes, so you're quite right. Bodo Glimt's last game of the season is right at the very end of November. His contract runs out the last day of November, which would be the 30th of November. Because he's at the top of the league, there won't be any playoffs for him to take part in. But if he came in during the international break, I think that would be absolutely ideal. Get some 6 weeks or so to start working with scouting and recruitment. It gives him 6 weeks to start working with whatever coaches he wants to keep at Celtic. It maybe gets him some ability to maybe keep Maloney and Martin O'Neill, let's say, in the background. Maybe O'Neill stays around for a few months as sort of an advisory type of thing. Other people in the past have talked about O'Neill being a director of football. Whether he'd fancy doing that, I don't know. That would almost certainly mean he would have to move up from London to Scotland again. I dare say he probably could do a director of football job from his house in London, but So if Knutsen's coming in, that would be brilliant. If your source is reliable, that's also brilliant. Having been doing this channel for 2 and a bit years, there are an awful lot of stories that I read that I really, really hope are true, and then it all turns out just to be rumours and stuff. But if your source is true, brilliant. And if he's never let you down before, that's also brilliant. Yes, Lauren, certainly every story I've read is that Ange Postecoglou never goes back anywhere where he's been before. So I can't see him coming back to Celtic. Also, a few of his friends from Australia have said that Ange Postecoglou isn't planning to come back to Celtic. He's not looking to come back to managing in the near future. He's kind of considering his options. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised whether Ange Postecoglou takes a year off and then comes back as a manager next summer. With it being a World Cup summer this summer, there's going to be a lot of chopping and changing of international managers, club managers, a lot of people moving on from one job to the other. So a lot of people leaving international football, maybe going back to club football or retiring altogether. And there's going to be quite a lot of folk going from club football into international management. I think there's whether Scotland in the next couple of weeks qualify or don't qualify for the World Cup. I think there's absolutely no doubt that Scotland's manager, Stevie Clarke, will be leaving. Craig Bellamy seems to be determined to stay at Wales no matter whether they qualify or don't qualify. So Knutsen, I would be very happy if Knutsen came to be the manager at Celtic. Really good reputation. He has succeeded year after year in Norway. He's brought through young players. He's brought in players on transfers and development. He's also adapted to losing players by keeping on refreshing his team and keeping on it, moving it forward. He's got more and more success in Europe. They got to the Europa League semi-finals last year. They're into the Champions League main stage this year. They're touch and go whether they're going to win the Norwegian League this season. I think he would bring fresh ideas, fresh ways of managing a club, fresh ways of developing the club, and I think he would be a breath of fresh air at Celtic. And I think, much like Ange Postecoglou, he would take Celtic forward and forward and forward. I'm not so convinced over the last 2-3 years that we've been going forwards. I think for one reason or another, or multiple reasons, we've kind of gone just kind of static, straight, or slightly backwards, depending on your point of view. That would, if Ange Postecoglou wanted to move into recruitment, scouting, etc., I think he would be an absolute ideal person. I think Martin O'Neill probably actually would actually have a really good ability in terms of recruitment, scouting, etc. Martin O'Neill, obviously, in his various different punditry jobs for radio and TV, sees football all around the world. O'Neill's managed at high levels internationally, high levels in terms of English club football, obviously high levels in terms of Scottish football and European football with Celtic. I think he's a really, really talented, intelligent person. I think he's also a player with a person who's very eloquent, very intelligent. I think he's a kind of player that would, kind of manager or recruitment person or scouting person who would sell the club very well. So if Ange Postecoglou wanted to do that sort of job at Celtic, that would be absolutely brilliant. I think, John Floyd, I think you make a good point. I think, like in any good team, you need a mixture of flair players, more aggressive, stronger players. I think you need creative players, you need imaginative players, you need players who stick really well to the script. I think you do need a real balance of players, and I think you then need to get a manager, a captain, a coaching structure that brings all those people together. And I think when you do all those things, you have a successful club. So I do agree that the speed of players like Chinyeki and Maeda, Osmond, a player with a lot of pace, I think all these things are really, really important. It was quite frustrating because in the game against Rangers and the game tonight, Osmond was showing all the kind of skills that we require, pace, good striker's instincts. He still needs to learn, I think, how to hold the ball up and bring his fellow attackers and midfielders into the game. He's only 19. I think he's got his ceiling is very, very high. I think Johnny Kenny's ceiling could also be very high as well. I just think he's not quite so talented, not quite so fast mentally and physically as Osmond is. And which is why it's such a crying shame that Osmond's probably going to be out for the duration of November, December, maybe even January. Wouldn't be too surprised if Ange Postecoglou didn't move into some form of international management next summer. The other place I can see him quite easily going would be Saudi Arabian football. I think he might well quite enjoy that style of lifestyle, and obviously probably enjoy the big money contracts you get in Saudi football. There were one or two rumours that's what Brendan Rodgers was lining himself up for now, was to go off to Saudi football. Yes, so Dexter, I think you make a good point, and I know a lot of people are sceptical about the board, but my understanding, my memory, my impression when Ange Postecoglou came in, he got kind of given, to use Brendan Rodgers' analogy, he was given the keys to the car and he was allowed to drive the car the way he wanted to drive the car. And he also was allowed to bring in his own passengers, i.e. his coaches. He was able to develop good relationships with scouting people, recruitment people. He seemed to develop a good relationship with the finance people, with Nicholson. I think Ange Postecoglou was a certain sort of person who works very well in teams. I think he was a person that gets people to join his team, join his way of thinking. I think he was a very inclusive manager. I think he's actually in a lot of ways quite similar to how Martin O'Neill was 25 years ago when he came to Celtic in 2000. Again, O'Neill was given a lot of freedom to decide players, coaching staff, transfers, recruitment, scouting, all these things. I don't think that the board interfered much at all with Ange Postecoglou. So I think if they brought in a new manager, I think part of that, and this is my personal opinion, is they would give him the keys to the car. They would give him a petrol card or whatever, so he can put as much petrol into the car as he wants within a certain level. The only thing, Martin, I think you make a good point. Bloom started at Union Saint-Gilloise in Belgium. He's then gone on to put a lot of money into Brighton. He's now put money into Hearts. I'm sure there are rules and regulations regarding people controlling financial interests in too many different clubs. That obviously was a major problem for Nottingham Forest and a major problem for Crystal Palace, in that a lot of their financial people who put a lot of money into those clubs had also put in big money. The guy at Nottingham Forest put a lot of money into one of the Greek clubs. The guy at Crystal Palace had put a lot of money into one of the French clubs. So I think it can create a conflict of interest. I think you can fall foul of a lot of different rules. So I think Bloom might well have some difficulties pledging as much money as he might well want to Hearts, because of his commitment to Brighton and a commitment to Union Saint-Gilloise in Belgium. But certainly the way that he developed Union Saint-Gilloise to come from a not particularly fancied side or good side in Belgian football to start challenging Antwerp, Anderlecht and Bruges was really very impressive. And I think he's brought a lot of those talents and skills and ways of running a club from that football to Brighton, and from Brighton to Hearts. And I think there are lots of things that Celtic could learn from other clubs. Yes, so it's a major problem for Celtic, in that our coefficient as a club individually wasn't too bad, which is why we only had one round of qualifying to go through. But Scotland's coefficient is poor and getting poorer and poorer and poorer, partly because Celtic haven't reached the heights up until last season, but primarily because the Hibs, the Hearts, the Aberdeens, the Dundee United, the St Mirrens, the Kilmarnocks, the Motherwells, any other club that Scotland's ever had in European football hasn't really performed at all. I don't think Aberdeen's going to get as many points in this European conference season to help Scotland's coefficient in a couple of years' time. Rangers are having an absolutely abysmal Europa League as well. And so I think Scotland's coefficient is going to go down and down before it starts coming back up again. So I think if Celtic do win the league and go into the Champions League qualifying, we're going to be going in with 3 or 4 rounds to go, which is kind of like how it was when Brendan Rodgers took over first time around in 2017. Obviously, when Rodgers came in the second time around, we were already pre-qualified for a couple of seasons. First couple of seasons this season, we had 1 round of qualifying to go through, and that's mostly due to all the other clubs in Scotland being so absolutely abysmal. Yes, and that's also part of the reason that countries like Denmark and Belgium have continued to get better and better, is that they've got quite a lot of clubs who are of a quality that they do decently or half decently or well in all the different European competitions, which helps your coefficient as a nation. It helps your coefficient, obviously, as an individual club as well, if you do well. But lots of clubs doing decently or half decently or very decently improves the national coefficient of the league, which helps in terms of qualifying. It helps in terms of automatic places. It helps in terms of what pots you are for all these different things. So the problem that Celtic have got in terms of their B team is that it's very, very age restricted, in that our B team plays in the Lowland League, and the agreement for Celtic's team to play in the Lowland League is they can't play any more than a certain number of overage players. So it has to be in essence, their academy team. So they can't keep people like Inamura or Paolo Bernardo or Dane Murray or whomever fit by playing them in the B team. So unfortunately, it's not like the good old days where you had a proper reserve team where there was no age restrictions. So it does mean that players who are not playing first team football don't really actually get any competitive football for weeks and weeks, months and months. So a player like Callum Osmond had played a couple of games for the B team, but hadn't played any games for Celtic since the pre-season had finished, up until when he played against Falkirk 8-9 days ago. But I do think, like many things, we should be getting our B team to be as strong as possible. If the B team's as strong as possible, that helps the team, those players move into the first team squad. I think also the what Sean Mullany was doing before he became the temporary assistant manager. I think that's also a really good thing. But it's going to probably take 2 or 3 years for it to really start bearing fruit in terms of, I think, players like Josh Clark, Ewer, Bonner, Turley, etc. All these players going off, McPherson, lots and lots of players that we've got have gone off to be playing for Ayr and Partick Thistle and various other clubs. But I think it takes a couple of seasons of those sorts of players to really start to filter through to the first team. Took Ryan Christie a couple of years, going off on loan here, then everywhere, for him to come back to be a Celtic first team player. Yes, and Strangelove the Doctor, that's something I've been trying to say for weeks and weeks, months and months. I think what we really require is a manager who comes to the club and is successful, but also is keen to stay at the club for a good length of time. I honestly think had Ange Postecoglou stayed at Celtic for years 3, 4 and 5, rather than moving down to Spurs, I think we would have actually moved forward quite considerably, because I think there would have been continuity of coaching, continuity between Postecoglou and scouting, Postecoglou and recruitment, Postecoglou and the finance people, Postecoglou and the players. I think Postecoglou would have done a better job of rotating and refreshing the squad. Also, given the way that Postecoglou managed teams and gave out the tactics and the training, etc., I think he also had more longevity than a manager who was much more of a tracksuit manager, who's involved much more intimately and closely on the training pitches, which reportedly is what Rodgers was like. He was much more of a tracksuit manager, taking training and being much more of a leader on the training pitches and training ground. Postecoglou was more of a manager who would observe and go around all the different stations and stuff, and would actually work hard off the pitch as well. I don't think Rodgers quite had enough time to work hard off the pitch because he was working so hard on the training pitches day to day. Just a wee reminder, please, can we keep our language family friendly? I know we're all adults, but YouTube doesn't like certain words. So please, kids, can we keep the words a bit more family friendly? Sorry, just trying to catch up with all the comments here. Yes, Lauren, it's a problem for all the Scottish Premiership clubs, is that half of the Scottish Premiership clubs can't afford to have a proper reserve team. The other half, the Rangers, the Celtic, the Hibs, the Hearts, can afford to have a proper reserve team now, because of the extra funding that some of them have had over recent years. But you can't really have a Scottish reserve league when there's only like four teams who are going to be in that. Whether there'd be some way of incorporating Celtic, Rangers, Hibs, Hearts into some form of reserve league with other European countries, there's no real reason why that couldn't be made possible. Some form of cooperation with English Premiership and English Championship teams to have a sort of a cross-border thing. I dare say something could be worked out, but I completely agree. I don't think playing against Bonnyrigg Rose and Clydebank and East Fife and the Highland League sides, the Border League sides. I don't think it's going to make Celtic's young players better. It might well be a stepping stone for them to play that sort of football, then to go off and play for Ayr, Partick Thistle, Raith Rovers, Inverness, Cally Thistle, etc. So that might be one way of using the Lowland League games, is a 1 year in that and then going on to play for Ayr, Partick Thistle, etc., etc. What I think Celtic really should hope to do is in a few years' time is have players good enough to come out the academy and go straight into the first team, like Dalglish, like McGrain, like McStay, like Charlie Nicholas, like lots and lots of players in the good old days could come straight from, in essence, the academy, a bit of time in reserve team football, and then into the first team, and then being a week in, week out starter for the first team. Sorry, we seem to be at cross purposes. I'm a bit behind with all the comments. I think I said that I thought that Celtic's team was good enough to win the Danish league. But we'll never ever know, because we're never going to be playing in the Danish league. Dexter, you make a good point, and it was something that Martin O'Neill was kind of alluding to in his post-match interview that's on YouTube. Celtic had come through 3 games in 7 days, well, three games in 8 days, because the Falkirk game was on the Wednesday. However, they did come through 120 plus minutes against Rangers on the Sunday. I think 1 or 2 players had minor knocks from the Falkirk game. 1 or 2 players had minor knocks from the Rangers game. I think that had an effect on Dyson Maida and Marcello Sirachi's fitness. So there's an argument to say that Celtic had come through 3 intensive matches in 8 days. Obviously, massive turnover in terms of coaching staff. Quite a few players, new players, being brought into the team that had been kind of frozen out under the Rodgers regime. So it's been a time where there's been a lot of changes. Players getting used to new coaching staff, new managerial staff. And if Dexter's rumours are true, in a couple of weeks' time, they'll be doing it all again with whoever's been brought in. If it is Kjetil Knutsen, that would be great. Yes, I think Celtic's squad, as it stands at the moment, is more than good enough to come back against Hearts, overhaul Hearts. I think it's more than good enough to beat St Mirren in the final in about 5 weeks' time, December the 14th. Obviously, if by December the 14th we had Alistair Johnston and Kelechi Iheanacho back fit, that would be great. Hopefully, if by December the 14th, Marcello Sirachi, Maida, Tierney are all fighting fit and no injuries and tweaks and stiffness and stuff, that would be ideal. So I do think Celtic squad, as it stands, is more than good enough to overhaul. Well, it's now 9 points from behind Hearts, but they've played a game more than us. So theoretically, if we win that game in hand, we'll be 6 points behind. We've still got to play Hearts 3 times this season. I think Hibs are good enough to beat anybody in the top 4. I think Rangers could be, if they make progress, they could be good enough to beat Hibs and Hearts, etc. throughout the season. I personally wouldn't say it was an embarrassment, but I understand where you're coming from. It was a poor performance, and far too many of Celtic's players didn't play well, and that was disappointing. Possibly, if we accept Dexter's point, which I think is a very reasonable point, major change behind the scenes at Celtic, major changes in terms of the coaching staff, quite a few players who weren't playing being brought into the team, quite a few tactical tweaks brought into the team, an intensive game against Falkirk, a very intensive, high-profile, high-pressure, long game against Rangers on Sunday, a day or two to rest, then flying off to Denmark on Wednesday for a game on Thursday. So I think there are mitigating factors for Celtic not performing at 100%. And the disappointment for me was that a lot of the players who have played especially well in the last couple of matches didn't play at all well tonight. McGregor was disappointing. Nygren, Engels were disappointing. Maeda was disappointing tonight. Tierney wasn't as good. Sriracha either wasn't fully fit or just wasn't given a chance. Ralston, who had played pretty decently the previous two games, had an absolute shocker this evening. So maybe it is fatigue. I think we were up against a much better team than we thought we were. Yes. We on tonight's performance, we were outplayed in all the sectors. As I was showing you a bit earlier on with the general stats, possession, we were 60-40 down. Shots were 22-5. Our passing was much reduced from normal. Our passing accuracy was very poor. I think there's an awful lot of the factors. Yes, I think that's probably a consensus opinion. If as Dexter's sources suggesting, Knutson's going to sign in the next few days, that would be great. Whether and if Knutson came in to manage Celtic from during this international break onwards, that would be great. If he is going to be coming in to be Celtic's manager on the 1st of December, once his contract at Bodo Glimt's run out, that would be okay. Not quite so good as having him in 2 weeks earlier. Still think that would give him enough time to get used to the players, get used to the squad, set his priorities for scouting and recruitment. Maybe he brings in his own scouting and recruitment people. He may well bring in a whole good long list of players he's been scouting and looking at to come in for Bodo Glimt before he left Bodo Glimt. I think that was also the case with Ange Postecoglou. I think he'd also been preparing for club management again, and he had a whole lot of players in his head from European football and from Japanese football. Yes, well, it's an interesting theory. There could well be a few players, as you're suggesting, Dexter, who are fringe players at other clubs who may be looking to come to Celtic for more guaranteed first-team football. It's a perfectly good theory. That's one of my thoughts, maybe why Dyson might well stay at Celtic this January and keep on playing for us through to the summer, would be the fact that if he's playing week in, week out for Celtic, that seems to be keeping the Japanese manager happy, in that he is the one Japanese player at Celtic who still has his place in the international squad. Big Tom, make an interesting point. I think the attraction of coming from Norwegian football to Scottish football would be certainly he's going to be coming to a club with a much bigger support, much more of a global brand as a team. I think it's for Knutsen, it might well be for him, like it was for Ange Postecoglou, a stepping stone into a big league team. So that might be the attraction, much like it used to be the attraction for a lot of players coming from European football, coming to play for Celtic or coming to play for a Scottish side, was a stepping stone to get into a big league side. I think if he does come to Celtic, Knutsen would have a bigger budget. He would have a much bigger support. He would have the 60,000 seater stadium behind him rather than 10, 20,000 seater stadium in Bodø Glimt. I think there are many attractions that someone like Knutsen would have coming to Scottish football. I think possibly that might be the same also for Nicky Hayne coming from Bruges. He reportedly is keen to try Scottish football. Maybe what he's looking for is a club that's twice the size of Bruges, which in terms of supporters and global brands, Celtic is certainly much bigger than many other clubs of incomparable leagues. That would not be the least bit surprising. As I said a wee bit earlier on, what the two thoughts for both Rodgers and for Postecoglou is that they're either thinking about going to Saudi football or they're thinking about going to be international managers. And obviously, Greece are not going to qualify for the World Cup. So it would not be the least bit surprising if the Greek manager got sacked after these last two World Cup qualifiers, because they're not going to get first place, they're not going to get second place in the group that Scotland and Denmark are in. So it would not be the least bit surprising for Greece to sack their manager in 2 games' time, and Ange Postecoglou's free. So I think I can see an awful lot of likelihood in what you're suggesting there. And as I said, other people have talked about that being one of Brendan Rodgers' wishes and targets was international management, and there will be a lot of international jobs cropping up after summer 2026, just naturally. Hail to you as well. Good of you to join as well. Yes, Aberdeen did get a draw. I think they were playing in Larnaca, which will be in Cyprus. It's a game apparently they probably should have won rather than just drawing. It is 1 point towards their Conference League knockout phase qualification. I would be personally surprised if Aberdeen do get as far as getting into the knockout stage. And the fact that all 3 of Scotland's sides who are in the league system now in Europe, all 3 of them are struggling at the moment. I think of the 3 Scottish sides, Celtic's got the best chance of turning things around. But obviously, we're halfway through. We're probably going to be out with the knockout phase qualification zone. I think there's still time, as Celtic did really get their act together to get into the top 24. But 4 games to go, 2 home, 2 away. I think there still are the points there to be got if we played at our best. But we've not been playing at our best for more than 2 or 3 games, or for more than 2 games in a row. So, Big Dom, my opinions in terms of what the board's targets are. I think the board, as I said earlier on, I think what they want is for Celtic to be as successful as possible on and off the pitch. If they're successful on the pitch, they'll be successful off the pitch. if they're successful off the pitch and on the pitch, that improves things like investment in the club, improves share prices, it improves all kinds of things financially for the club. And as a knock-on effect, it has a benefit for share dividends and so on as well. But if Celtic's not successful on the pitch, their share prices will go down and down and down, which means their financial investment in the club goes down and down and down. So it's not good for them if Celtic aren't being successful on the pitch. Yes, my name is David. The 67 bit is simply to create a channel name rather than my full real name. And obviously, I was born in 1967. It just coincides that 1967 was probably the greatest day in Celtic's history. Was in 1967 in May in Lisbon. It was possibly one of the greatest days for British, certainly the greatest day for Scottish football, and possibly one of the greatest days for British football, in that no British team had ever won such a high level competition. So yes. So, Big Tom, my feelings for what the board want is for Celtic to be as successful as possible on the pitch and off the pitch, because being successful on the pitch adds into the success off the pitch. That helps boost merchandising, investment in the club, TV money, sponsorship, shirt deals, all these things, and all these things improving then improves share prices. Celtic still actually has, in terms of a football club share price, it's still got a very, very good share price. It's still a very, very attractive club for outside investors to invest their money in. Celtic's second biggest shareholder, they are some kind of hedge fund financial investment company who have a vague interest in football, but they have purposely invested in Celtic. They've invested a lot of money in Celtic to buy 14% of the shares. So in essence, Dermot Desmond and this investment company practically are half of Celtic's shareholders. I'm sorry, Sligo Boy. I don't have any favourites on this channel. I actually find it quite difficult talking and thinking and looking at the comments, trying to filter out any comments that have got rude words or maybe not such nice phrases, etc. Plus also trying to and that my channel doesn't have pay per whatever. There are quite a lot of channels who have live streams, and the way you get your comment put up is you pay money. That is certainly not the channel, not what we do on this channel. I'm not doing this channel to make money. I'm doing this channel to keep mentally active now that I am semi-retired or retired. I'm still not very certain whether I'm going to go back to work or not. So I'm not doing this for money, and there's no pay per play or pay per get your comment up on the screen. I don't have any favourites. I just can't keep up with everybody's statements and everybody's comments. And it is really nice to share pleasant, polite debating points, even though we don't all agree on everything. The great majority of us are all being pleasant, polite, respectful, etc. I have vaguely thought about getting a co-presenter, because I think that's also quite a good thing to do. There are some channels that do that. The best one for having sort of two people talking at the same time is Celtic AM with Hamish Carton. I think he has some really good contributors on with him. The problem with having a live stream with two presenters is the logistics are more complicated, the IT is more complicated, etc. I do have a couple of glamorous assistants, but they don't want to be part of the part of the live stream either. They want to remain anonymous in the background. So. As I've said, so Big Dom, I didn't say that because I think, as I've said said on a recurring basis, that's I think what Celtic need to do. And I think for Celtic to be successful on and off the pitch, they need to improve all those other side of things. And I think one of the most important things Celtic needs to have is a continuity of management and philosophy that keeps on going from one manager to another. Which is why there may be some, as well as being a Celtic fan, I also support Liverpool. Now, that was largely due to my hero as a boy was Kenny Dalglish. He moved to Liverpool in '77. But if you think about Liverpool, they had a continuity of players, a continuity of coaches and managers. They had Bill Shankly, who handed over to Bob Paisley, who handed over to Ronnie Moran and Roy Evans and Joe Fagan, and then Dalglish as the player manager took over. They had a real continuity of philosophy, tactics, players, and one manager handed over to somebody who was already part of that system, who handed over to somebody else, to somebody else, to somebody else. And I think that's actually a way that Celtic could really progress things, is have a conveyor belt of developing players, developing coaches, and players moving from academy into first team, and coaches moving up the ranks from coaches to assistant manager to manager, and other people coming in underneath them to keep on that conveyor belt of developing internally. And I think that's a way that Celtic actually could really compete in terms of punching above their weight in Europe, is having that continuity of player development and coaches and coaching development, and a coach becoming assistant manager, the assistant manager becoming a manager, and then someone else coming in behind that and going up and up the ranks as well. Yes, Big Dom. I don't know whether that's what Knutson's designs would be. He stuck at it at Bodø Glimt for I think 5 seasons or so, and he had several opportunities where he could have left Bodø Glimt earlier, but he chose to stay in Norwegian football for 4 or 5 years, possibly a bit longer than that. So I'm just speculating. I'm just an enthusiastic amateur, much like yourself. I don't know anything. I just speculate and have my opinions. So Knutson might choose to stay at Celtic in the longer term. And I think if he did stay at Celtic in the longer term, that would be really good for Celtic. However, coming back to the other point, if Knutson brought in some coaching staff who'd been with him from before, but also took under his wing one of Celtic's current coaching staff, or brought in a potentially promising young ex-Celtic player to be a coach, like Scott Brown, just as an example. I'm not saying Scott Brown would necessarily be the person I would choose, but coaching him up through coaching assistant manager to the manager, that might be one benefit of Knutson. But also what Knutson might bring in is a really good structure of how to develop players and keep things moving forward. He might well be able to help recruitment and scouting, so that keeps on being continuing success. So it could well be that his really good practices, if Celtic kept on using them, could move Celtic further and further forwards. There are a number of clubs where that has worked out really, really well, is that good management structure brought in by previous managers is carried on carried on by new managers, and that's kept on being carried on by the people who are more permanent at a club. And typically, as things are standing with Celtic, the board member, the shareholders, are the ones who've been with the club. Well, Dermot Desmond's been with the club for now about 30 years as a major shareholder. Frankly, no. I think of the people who are most likely to lose to be moved off the board are the two executive members of the board. So that's Mackay, who's the chief financial officer, and Nicholson, who's the chief executive officer. I think they're the two most likely to get moved off the board. To move Dermot Desmond off the board, you would need to buy his 34% shareholding, which would cost an absolute fortune. To move the second biggest shareholder, who's this investment company with their 14%, would cost an absolute fortune as well. So one possibility would be if the board's going to be wholesale changes in the board, it would probably require a rich billionaire American, a rich billionaire Saudi, Qatari type person. Actually, Dermot Desmond is a billionaire and soon reportedly to get another billion from selling one of his companies. So maybe if there was a younger version of Dermot Desmond, a man in his 40s, who's got several £billion to spare, maybe he could come in and buy Celtic. But to buy Celtic would cost an absolute arm and a leg. So I personally don't see any of the board moving on. People who might get moved on would be the two executive members on the board, i.e. Nicholson and Mackay. Yes. All the financial ins and outs, Sligo boy, I'm not an expert in. And I've seen different versions on the internet as to how much money and share dividends the various different board members do or don't take out of the club, how much they reinvest in the club, etc. Part of the thing about Celtic is because they are financially strong off the pitch, unlike quite a lot of other clubs whose board members and directors have to keep on bailing the club out, as happened at Rangers. Previously, their board members, their directors kept them to plunge millions and millions of their own money into the club. At Celtic, that isn't the case because Celtic are strong off the pitch because they've been so strong on the pitch. Sligo boy, yes. I think Sean Maloney is a really good assistant manager. He's proven that as second in command to Roberto Martinez. I don't honestly actually know what Martinez is doing at the moment. He does have ties to the Lanarkshire, Glasgow area of Scotland, reportedly through marriage and stuff. So it wouldn't be an outlandish choice. I've never seen his name put forward at all in the speculation for Celtic manager this time around. I think Sean Maloney's a good assistant manager. I think he's a good person to use on the pitch. I think John Kennedy was a pretty good person to use as a coaching person. I think he did a good job blending in and bringing in Ange Postecoglou's tactics. So the answer to that question, Big Dom, is I think the answer is yes. Anybody who's coming in to do a new job, I think they would come with a list of assurances. They may even have those list of assurances built into their contract. Contracts, etc. nowadays are a million times more complicated than they ever used to be. So I'm sure that any manager who's coming in at this stage of a season would be coming in with several assurances as to what's going to be the plan for January, but particularly I would have thought probably what's the plan for next summer, the following winter, and the following summer, and the following winter, and the following summer. I think any club needs to have at least a 3-year plan. That 3-year plan then becomes a 5-year plan. That 5-year plan then becomes a 10-year plan. The reason, Clashman Umpty, I think that any new manager would want some remaining coaching staff is simply for continuity. If you now, maybe Knutsen has been lined up to be Celtic's manager for the last 2 or 3 years. Maybe there was a strong understanding that Rodgers wasn't going to stay past 3 seasons. So maybe, let's say he's been keeping a very close eye on Celtic, so he knows all the Celtics players inside out. The benefit of having a Maloney, a McManus, a Strachan, a Stevie Woods, whomever behind the scenes as a coach is that they all know the players. They know what makes Forrest and Ralston and Tierney and McGregor and Schmeichel and so on. They know what makes them tick. They know what their various different tolerances are for training. They know how maybe to speak to them in terms of getting them fired up or motivated, or how to cheer them up when they're feeling down and sad and dispirited, etc. So that's the reason I think that any manager who comes in would probably keep a few of the coaches from the previous regime. I think also Celtic would be quite keen to keep a few ex-Celtic players and people who know the club of Celtic to help the new manager settle in as well. I think it worked. I think Ange Postecoglou came in pretty much with nobody as his backroom team. He later brought in Harry Kewell, but he mostly... Okay, Clashman Numpty, the beauty of being a Celtic fan or being a football fan is that we can agree to disagree. I think in terms of continuity, keeping some coaching staff from before to join your staff is a really good way. Not saying it has to be Maloney or Fotheringham or Strachan or Woods. I think keeping some people from a previous regime to the new regime works. It clearly worked, I think, well with John Kennedy being a coach, then assistant manager over several different managers. I think it helped Ange Postecoglou fit in. I think it helped Rodgers fit in coming back the second time around. The benefit of people like Maloney and Fotheringham is they've got a lot of experience from all over the place. Fotheringham's been an assistant manager and coach in Germany. Maloney's obviously had all that international experience as second in command to Martinez. It's difficult to know, because I suspect if it is Knutsen or whoever comes in prior to the January window, I think they're probably going to want to keep most of the current squad, move on a few players who don't want to stay at Celtic, move on a few players who are surplus to requirement. So I would say in the current squad, Yang is definitely surplus to requirements, assuming that Jota is going to come back nice and soon. It's going to depend a wee bit on players like what Knutsen's looking to bring in, as to whether players like Paulo Bernardo's got a future at the club. Odin Thiago Holmes going to be coming back off his loan in American soccer. I can't see him having a long-term future at Celtic. It may be, obviously, with Knutsen knowing Odin Thiago Holm from earlier days when Holm was playing in Norwegian football. Maybe that resurrects his career. So I could certainly see a few players like Yang moving on. I could certainly see a player like Paulo Bernardo, Luke McCowan maybe being moved on. Depends a wee bit on where the new manager sees his first priorities in strengthening the team. So they do have a relatively significant number of midfielders, particularly when Nygren's playing as a more conventional central midfielder. I don't think that's his best role. We do have quite a number of wide players, and it may be that the number of wide players that we've got are too many to fit into Knutsson's system. So you might well see a couple of wide players moving on. I think there's a fair chance that Forrest might well be coming towards the end of his career at the end of this season anyway. Wouldn't be the least bit surprised to see him move into the coaching staff. So point both Big Dom and Brandon Rook are putting forward is that Maeda might be off. My personal feeling, and this is a personal feeling, is that Maeda is more likely to stay at Celtic this January than leave this January, simply because if he leaves Celtic in January, he's going to be moving to a new club, obviously. It's going to take him time to settle in probably to the new team, get into the first team, get regular exposure as a first-team player at the new team, which might mean he drops out of contention for the Japanese World Cup squad. I think if Maeda was to stay at Celtic, he would stay obviously in first-team football. He would stay playing on a regular basis. The Japanese manager's happy for Maeda to play at Celtic. He wasn't happy for Kyogo to play at Celtic. That's why Kyogo, well, one of the reasons that Kyogo left was to keep his international career going. That's completely backfired on him. So for that reason, I can see Maeda staying at Celtic in January and moving in June, July after the World Cup. Hatati's a player I can easily see moving on. The problem is whether anybody's going to want to buy Hatate the way that he's played in the 4 months so far this season. So thanks, Malleus. Yes, I think Knutson would be a really good manager to bring in for the same reason that Ange Postecoglou was a good manager to bring in that he had good knowledge of Japanese and Korean football, etc., from having managed over in that part of the world. And I think that Knutson obviously would have really good knowledge of Norwegian football, Swedish football, Danish football, Icelandic football. And I think that Scandinavian football is an area with lots and lots of really talented young players who in terms of background and weather and diet and all these kind of things would fit well into Scottish football. I think there's much less culture shock moving from Scandinavia to Scotland. Obviously, an awful lot of people in the Scandinavian countries speak English as their second language, which really, really helps fitting into a new club as well. So I think Knutson would be a very, very positive move because it would allow Celtic to tap into a transfer market, a scouting market that we have bought a fair few players from that side of the world, but I think it would really, really improve our ability to bring players down from Scandinavia into Scottish football. We've had good success, players coming from Sweden, especially coming into Scotland, and a couple of our signings this summer have come from there as well. My suspicion is that Bodo Glimt have so whatever he's been using at Bodo Glimt is the same sort of thing as Jamestown Analytics. Midtjylland have apparently have something very, very similar to that as well. Their own version. So I think Jamestown's Analytics is just one version of the same sort of thing. The commentator for today's game was talking about a thing called Moneyball. Moneyball was a system that was brought into baseball scouting to scout the best players from the minor leagues and from college and so on. And it was a very different way about how to scout players. And it was based a lot on numbers and attributes and computer systems and stuff. And if Knutsen does bring in a variation on Jamestown analytics, which is what he's been using in Norwegian football. I think that would really move Celtic forward. I dare say Celtic probably have some variation on the same sort of thing. It's just not working, in that our recruitment and our scouting hasn't been anywhere near as good as it should have been in the last 2 or 3 years, 4 or 5 years, etc. Yang leaving, I think, had Celtic been a bit more successful in the summer window, I think Yang would have been out the door. He was down at Birmingham, about to sign when he got recalled by Rodgers and Nicholson and stuff. I think had Hatate not been injured at the very end of last season, I think he would have gone this summer. I think there were clubs lining up to buy him this summer. I don't think there'll be clubs lining up to buy him in January. So I think what he requires is a good season, or a good end to the season starting from now. There's an outside chance if Hatate had a particularly good 4 or 5 months for Celtic, he might get himself back into the World Cup squad. Anyway. So Ralston, I can see the benefit of keeping Ralston at Celtic, in that he's dependable, he's happy being the second or third choice. With the UEFA coefficients, we have to have a total of 8 players who are Celtic trained or Scottish trained. Celtic have for many years struggled to reach those 4+4 quotas for Champions League squads and Europa League squads, etc. Part of the reason that Celtic's squad for this Champions League qualifiers and then Europa League group stage maybe wasn't quite as strong as it could have been or should have been was partly the fact that we had a lack of Scottish trained players and a lack of Celtic trained players. And that again goes right back to poor player development from youth level, academy level upwards, in that we haven't got terribly many McGregors and Forrests and Ralstons and Murrays, etc. to go around. We also haven't been very good for signing players from other Scottish clubs either, in that Luke McCowan obviously came from Dundee last season, but we've not been terribly good at signing any players from any other clubs, which is why a player like Lennon Miller would have been ideal for Celtic. Good, young, talented player, Scottish trained, locally grown, a player I think who's going to get better and better and better. I think in a lot of ways, Lennon Miller would have been better to stay in Scotland and play for Celtic than going off to Udinese. His career's not gone brilliantly so far in Italy, but obviously still early days there. Yeah, okay. Well, we have to remember also Anthony Ralston is considered one of Scotland's internationally best right backs, in that he's been in Scotland's squad as a right back for years and years and years and years. Even when he was second choice behind Alistair Johnson, he was still playing in European nations tournaments. He's second choice at Celtic at the moment, although I suppose he's actually first choice. He's jumped over Colby Donovan, but he, in essence, on the strength of the team, strength of player, he would be Celtic's probably second or third strongest right back, and yet he is one of Celtic's 2 players away to play for Scotland in a few days' time. I think Anthony Ralston, in terms of playing in Scottish football, is good enough. I think moving to the next level, playing in European football, he's not quite good enough. So it's also a wee bit of a criticism of the Scottish international team, that even though Ralston is second choice at Celtic, not really good enough to play at that next level, i.e. European level for Celtic, he's still good enough to be one of Scotland's certainly Scotland's best 2 or 3 right backs. Now, admittedly, Scotland has had a few problems at right back in terms of injuries and players dropping out the squad, which has kind of always kept him in the international squad. But I think Ralston's a dependable player. I think when Ange Postecoglou came in, Ralston was a good stepping stone. He was dependable. Obviously, later in the season, Juranovic came in to replace him, and then the following season it was Alistair Johnston came in to replace him after Juranovic left. But I think Ralston's a dependable player. He's Celtic trained. He's been at the club for a long, long time. He seems happy to remain at Celtic even as a second or third choice player. I think he's a dependable person to have in the background. So for that reason, I don't see Ralston being moved on. So Brian O'Rourke, if you were talking about the Scottish Premiership, my personal feeling is that Celtic will win the Scottish Premiership. That's my personal feeling, and I think that would be the case whether Martin O'Neill keeps on being manager for the rest of the season, which I think is unlikely. I think whoever comes in the next few weeks, which is what the plan is apparently. So in terms of Scott, so to answer your question, Brian, my personal feeling is that Celtic will still come first in the Scottish Premiership. I don't see the Hearts' good performances carrying on. Once they start getting injuries, suspensions, players losing a bit of form, once other teams get used to the way that Hearts have changed their style, they get used to what Braga does, what Kiziridis does, they get used to the different way that Shanklin's playing this season. I think other teams will start taking more and more points off Hearts. Remembering Hearts' last game at the same day as we played against Falkirk, they played against St Mirren. They were incredibly lucky to get out that game with a draw. St Mirren should have been 3-1 up, for it was not a stupid decision by VAR to disallow a goal for no apparent reason. Hearts almost certainly would have lost that game. Similarly, they played against Rangers early in the season. The VAR gave them 3 really beneficial decisions that completely changed that game. So my personal feelings, Celtic are still going to win the league because they have got good strength and depth. They've got quite a lot of injuries at the moment. If a manager could get them to play at their best on a consistent basis, rather than 1 or 2 games at a time, which is what Rodgers was doing at the start of the season, O'Neill got them to play 2 really good games in a row. They had a poor game tonight. And to answer your question, Classman Numpty, yes, Ralston was poor tonight, and that's because he's gonna struggle stepping up to that next level, i.e., European level. I didn't see Ralston and McGregor fighting with each other. Didn't see very much in the way of Celtic's players fighting with each other. Didn't actually see an awful lot of Celtic's players really geeing each other up or firing each other up. I think Celtic's response to going 1-0 down was a bit disappointing. There didn't seem to be anybody having another huddle or all the players getting together for 30 seconds of motivational speaking from McGregor, etc. Do you remember a couple of times in last year's Champions League, Celtic, after they conceded a goal, had a wee bit of a mini huddle, and that really seemed to get Celtic fired up again. They didn't seem to really get themselves fired up after going 1-0 down. They very quickly were 2-0 down. Within about 90 seconds, we were 2-0 down. Then another goal about 5 minutes after that. So I thought maybe at half time Celtic did show a bit more passion, a bit more fight in the second half. I think the second half was pretty even. Both teams had about 3 chances at goal in the second half. We scored the only goal of the second half. So I think we did perform a bit better in the second half as a team. And I think we had performed pretty well for the first half hour, but we had a terrible spell for 15 minutes before halftime, which is where the game was completely lost. But before that, we were being outpassed, created, and we were losing too much possession because midfield just wasn't working. But I didn't personally see. Maybe there was players fighting and disputing with each other. I think the only time I actually saw anybody disputing or being angry with any of their teammates was when Schmeichel kicked the ball out to somebody on the wing, and whoever the player was ran the wrong way, i.e. you thought the ball was going to go shorter and it went longer, or vice versa. Those are all players. Those are all players who probably, apart from Schmeichel, would be considered backup players at the club. In the way that things are at the moment, I don't personally see Schmeichel leaving before the end of the season. I don't see Schmeichel coming back to Celtic for next season. I think Schmeichel's going to retire after this summer's World Cup. I think he's going to move into media, or just completely leave football altogether this summer. But I don't personally see Schmeichel leaving Celtic in January. It may be whoever the new manager is decides to put Sinisalo up to being the number one, which would make a lot of sense, in that Sinisalo's got a 5-year contract at Celtic. He's got 4 more years to go. Schmeichel's got is under contract only till the end of May, so I can certainly see a new manager coming in deciding to move him on. So, Brian O'Rourke, my personal feeling is what Celtic should do is use the 13 days after the Kilmarnock game, before the St Mirren match, to nail down a new manager. Now, Dexter, who was on the live stream earlier, said he's got an inside source who says that Celtic are soon to be announcing Kjetil Knutsen as the manager. The indications were that Knutsen would come in between the Kilmarnock match and the St Mirren match and be in place for the St Mirren match in the league, which would mean he'd be in place for the next Europa League match against Feyenoord. We've then got Hearts on the 7th of December, and then the League Cup final on the 14th of December. So all that would make a tremendous amount of good sense. So the pictures behind me are a reminder of the fact that Celtic have been incredibly successful over recent years. We won a couple of trebles prior to Martin O'Neill coming in 2000, and since then we've won about seven trebles since that time. We've won countless doubles. We've won the massive majority of the Scottish Premierships for the last 25 years. We've won practically every Scottish League for the last 15 years. We've done doubles and trebles most seasons over that period. So we are tremendously successful. So the pictures on the wall there, we've got a mixture of, some of the ones are old players like Shunsuke Nakamura, some Kenneth Dalglish. They've got the Lisbon Lions there as well. We've got several of them celebrating trebles and doubles we've won in recent years. I don't think Celtic are a terrible team. I think Celtic had a poor performance tonight on the back of 2 very good performances in the previous 2 games that we'd played. We had a couple of good performances under Brendan Rodgers, a lot of really poor performances under Brendan Rodgers, and we were, my view, going down and down and down under Brendan Rodgers because the players' confidence was rock bottom. Yes, sorry. I do have the habit of maybe taking some things too seriously. I did appreciate that you were telling a joke, being jovial, which is one of the things I particularly like about having Martin O'Neill in as the manager is he always tries to keep the atmosphere, the background at Celtic nice and positive, nice and cheerful, nice and positive. For me, it's pretty clear that look at the difference between the players in training and on the pitch and in their media commitments now over the last week, comparing how they'd been for the last 2 or 3 weeks before that. It was like chalk and cheese. Players were suddenly smiling at the training venue. They were joking and laughing with each other. They were getting on with each other. They were positive in their attitude. They were positive in all their comments in the press and at press conferences. And I think that's really, really important. A happy club, happy players, happy club, all these things fit together. And I think that's part of what a really good manager does. They come into a club and they immediately instill a good atmosphere, good team spirit, good team morale. And I think that can really turn things around. And I think that's what what Martin O'Neill did when he came in along with Maloney on the Tuesday, Wednesday of last week. I think that's what someone like Derek McInnes has done coming into Hearts. Hearts, a team that's been quite fragmented in a lot of disputes behind the scenes. I think he's come in and he's galvanised that team, galvanised that squad, mixed new players with old players, and got a really good bunch of players playing together. Yes, it is. It's disappointing, and as I was saying a wee bit earlier on, when I was planning this live stream, doing the promotional stuff for it on Wednesday and this morning, well, actually Thursday morning, because we're now into Friday, I was actually quite positive. I thought we were going to be celebrating or recognising a draw tonight's game. It was a disappointing result. Well, I would be happy to admit that I'm optimistic regarding Celtic. I've always been optimistic regarding Celtic, even when we were having terrible spells in the 80s and 90s. I was still optimistic that Celtic were going to do well, and we did do well. We had some good spells in the 80s and 90s. We won some trophies, and then from when Wim Jansen came in, Celtic turned around, and then since O'Neill came in 2000, along with really strong, successful financial management off the pitch, since then Celtic has been a brilliant club to support. And my personal feeling is that if we get a good manager who brings all the players together, be it in November, December, January, whenever it's going to be, plus backing to move players on and bring players in January and the following summer and the following January and the following summer, I think Celtic can really, really move forward a long way. But it's going to require a mixing of the current players and the old players. I think getting rid of all the players, so many players, is what causes clubs to keep on spiralling downwards. And for me, observing Rangers over the last 10 years or so, that's what's caused them to spiral down and down and down and down, is the constant changing of managers, the constant changing of players, the constant changing of behind the scenes people at the club as well, different directors of football and different this, that and the others at the club. I think you need continuity plus adding new players into it and adding new coaches and new people behind the scenes. I think all these things need to be constantly refreshed, but there needs to be a core that keeps on going through any club, on the pitch and off the pitch. Yes. So if one only thinks that Dermot Desmond, etc., are in it for the money, to protect their investment in the club and to protect their shares, assuming that at some point they want to sell their shares or hand their shares over to other members of the family, they do want the club to keep on improving and progressing. it's counterproductive if they're only in it for financial reasons. It's counterproductive if Celtic aren't delivering on the pitch, because they'll stop delivering off the pitch, which then affects their finances. Anyway, Tony Bloom, it's difficult to know how much influence Tony Bloom's going to have, because he still has a strong influence at Brighton. He still has an interest at Union Saint-Gilloise in Belgium. And that starts to cause an awful lot of conflicts regarding conflicts of interest between 3 different clubs. It starts to get into problems with UEFA and FIFA and all kinds of different things. And if Hearts did get into European competitions next year, it could cause potential problems with that as well. Well, Paul McEwen, you're entitled to your opinion. I'm entitled to my opinion. All I'm saying is Dermot Desmond is an incredibly rich, successful businessman. The reason he's made so much money is because he's very, very good at business, and he's very good at investing, and he's very good at developing things. And if he's only in it for the money, he will want Celtic to be as successful as possible, because that will help his own finances, and it will give him several more billions to pass on to his kids and his grandkids, etc. But you can be rude about him and disagree with him and criticize him, etc. That's your perfect right to do so. So, Brian O'Rourke, coming back to your point, I think Tony Bloom could be, in terms of taking Hearts forward, I think that could also help Celtic move forward, in that we would have genuinely strong competition to keep Celtic moving forward and forward. And it also, I think, if Hearts are a strong side, that also boosts negotiating power for the various Scottish competitions, for TV money, prize money, sponsorship money, merchandising rights, all these other things as well. The more teams in Scotland who are strong and powerful and successful, the better it is for Scotland in terms of the Scottish Premiership, in terms of all those other things that makes the Scottish Premiership a better league. Well, no, the Tony Bloom has managed it so far because, unlike the Nottingham Forest chairman and the Crystal Palace chairman, who've got their teams up to that high level, he's not actually he's not got 2 of his clubs up to a high level. But he's also according to stuff I was reading, Tony Bloom is restricted as to how much money he can put into Hearts, because of his controlling interest at Brighton. So that he has got restrictions reportedly into how much he can put into Hearts. So he hasn't got a limitless bankroll to put into Hearts, from what I've read. And at the moment he has interests in different places, much like the Red Bull organisation has interests all around the world. And sometimes they have to resolve conflicts of interest when their various different clubs all come together. Big Dom, I don't know. That's a very good question, and I don't know quite why Dermot Desmond has so much controlling power. He is by far the biggest shareholder. He's got 2.5 times as much as the next biggest shareholder. He's 34. This financial group are about between 11 and 14, depending on what figures you believe. And for Dermot Desmond to have remained the majority shareholder and the lead of the board for so long, he clearly has to have other people who are major shareholders who are willing to put their shares with his shares if it ever comes to a board majority vote, etc. and things. So clearly he has allies elsewhere amongst the shareholders to give him 51% or more. Maybe if Dermot Desmond does sell his Irish healthcare company for 1.3 billion is his share. Maybe he'll plough lots and lots of more money into Celtic. I don't know. I can't answer that question. I do not have the foggiest idea. I know vaguely about football. I know next to nothing about all the financial background. But it would be quite interesting if someone could explain to us why that's the case. Yes. So Sligo boy, you make a great point. Obviously, Dermot Desmond, one reason or another, has tremendous influence on Celtic's board, and that's not typical for him being a non-executive, etc. But he does have tremendous power. Clearly, for whatever reason he's got that power, it's because the other shareholders, the other investors, the other people who are on the board and the other people who invest in the company are big shareholders who don't want to be on the board, of which there are quite a lot of people. They clearly are happy for Dermot Desmond to be that person. There are quite a lot of big shareholders at Celtic who don't want to be an executive or non-executive on the board, such as the Lindsell Train Group, who are the second biggest shareholders. They have no membership on the board as executives or non-executives. Yes. So he's by far the biggest individual. As I say, the second biggest shareholder is a financial investment company. Anyway, I think I know we usually do go on a wee bit longer than midnight, but as I said, I've got quite a number of things to do tomorrow. I did make a promise to the person who is most important in my life and the second most important person in my life that I was going to go to bed nice and early so that I was fresh to do all the various different things I'm going to do tomorrow. So it would be really good if we could call it an evening at midnight. We've been going for 3.5 hours. It's been an absolute joy to have a chat and debate with everybody. It's been brilliant to share opinions. It's been brilliant to share contrary opinions, and everybody has been willing to accept everybody's opinions. Everybody's been nice, apart from a wee bit of nonsense at the start. It's all been very pleasant, very respectful, just the way that I want the live streams to be. And I think it's really good fun if it's done like that. Anyway, so cut a long story short, we will call it a day, call it an early morning. Going to be planning to keep on doing Thursday live streams unless Celtic are playing at the time. So in 3 weeks' time, we'll be playing Feyenoord as an evening match, so we can still have the evening live stream. But the two live games, two Europa games at home later on, we'll be moving from one day to the other. But anyway, so we'll have another live stream next Thursday at 9 o'clock, all things being equal. So just like to say thank you very much to everybody. Good luck to Celtic in their game on Sunday against Kilmarnock, and good luck in all those who are trying to recruit the best possible manager to Celtic, and at the same time, hopefully, recruiting the best form of scouting and recruitment and the best form of academy development as well, because I think all those things are needed for Celtic to keep on improving, to achieve more and more success in Scotland, but particularly more and more success in Europe. I think getting success in Europe is going to be years for us to do, but I think it's there. Yes, sorry, tomorrow is now Saturday, so I'm sorry it's moved into Friday. So in 2 days' time, on Sunday, we'll be getting our next game. Then it's 13 days off for the next one. So speak to you all again next Thursday at 9 o'clock. And so until then, goodbye and hail, hail. you.